By the end of the summer of 1972, we completed the Wicked Lester record.
Wow.
Gene and I both hated the album. We sat down together, just the two of us, and decided we didn't want to release it. No band, no label, no gear, no problem. We made finding a lead guitar player our initial priority. Only instead of looking for a lead guitar player, we decided to seek out a drummer. Eventually, we found an interesting ad in Rolling Stone and rang the number. We had one line of questioning. Would you do anything to make it?
Yeah,
Said the guy on the other end of the line. Would you wear a dress?
Yeah.
Peter could barely read or spell, and he wasn't a thinker.
When I grew my hair long, I got my ass kicked every day catching a train to go down to the village and learn how to play.
I grew up in Brooklyn. I was hard. I was the toughest kid in the band.
no.
No doubt about it.
Guitar player wanted with flash and balls. That was the ad we placed in the Village Voice. A guy walked in wearing one red sneaker and one orange sneaker. He was about my age and kind of goofy and pigeon-toed. While we were still talking, this other guy plugged in his guitar and started playing. Hey man, shut up and wait your turn, we told him.
Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
You know, I am the spaceman, the one and only, and you know.
Almost from the minute we started playing, something happened that took us to a completely different place. This is it. This is lethal.
Yeah.
This is the goods. Somehow, wearing white face paint went hand in hand with our new outfits. Together in our loft on 23rd Street, we all sat around looking at a mirror on the back of the door. We had no idea how to apply makeup. It was as if we were possessed, just smearing makeup on, wiping it off, trying different things.
We knew we wanted to do something that no one else ever did in the world.
The Kiss makeup that I designed is so distinctive, you know, I don't think I could top it, and you know, I didn't even want to go there.
The first of the 3 gigs was on January 30th, 1973. Ace turned up late and refused to carry anything, not one thing.
You know, they could play, go, Ace is lazy, he never lifted amplifiers. I had 2 of my friends doing it for me.
Then as we were unloading it, Ace pulled out his penis totally out of the blue and said, "This is my dick without a hard-on." Huh?
Whatever.
We're Kiss! We want everybody here to come along with us! You've got nothing to lose!
Ace had jotted down a logo for the flyer for our Bleecker Street loft shows. He was a pretty decent artist. I took his sketch and used it as the basis for a series of Kiss logos I designed, ultimately arriving at the one that has adorned all things Kiss for the past 40 years. From this point on, we began to create a world that we ultimately inhabited and ruled. But at the start, we certainly weren't at the center of anything.
There's a time that we sat together back in the day when we were really a band, the band, you know, ate the same crap, shared rooms, Holiday Inns, dyed our hair blue black in a bathtub, walked through Greenwich Village, got hit with eggs and bombs, you know, never got any airplay, never got anything great. We were like the worst band considered in the world, but we hung in tough. We went through it, you know that, and we hung tight, and we became whatever we became today. And I'm really proud of that.
You're right on top of them. Put your 2 lips together, ladies and gentlemen. Kiss! Kiss! Kiss!
It was a benchmark in my career. It was, you know, the first time my face was on a record ever.
Here from Kiss is Gene Simmons.
We were exhausted from touring, but we had careers to build, so as soon as the first album began to lag, we went right back into the studio to record our second, which was titled Hotter Than Hell.
Neil rented Village Recorder out by the beach in Santa Monica, and
we felt out of place in a million small ways, because we were a New York band with New York attitudes. The record label rented us cars, but that was just asking for trouble. Ace and Peter drank too much and drove too fast and cracked up their cars.
It was a fun album to do. We tracked that in L.A. I remember one crazy day, Joe Cocker came walking in the studio and he was really loaded. And I fell down on the couch. And, you know, there's been a lot of crazy moments in the studio.
Recording was smooth, more or less, although Peter and Ace were a handful. Ace had his usual problems showing up on time, and Peter was, as Peter has always been, deeply insecure about his role in the process.
Walking around one morning after breakfast, I noticed Lyle Tuttle's tattoo parlor on Sunset Boulevard. I walked in. I decided I would get one tattoo. I swore to myself that it would be one, just one, for life. I knew I didn't want a skull with a top hat or a battleship or mom, so I settled on a rose on my shoulder. Back at the hotel with my new ink, I called home. I was excited and also wanted to ruffle my parents' feathers, I guess. Guess what, Mom? I just got a tattoo. Huh? Oh, Stan, my mother said, referring to a Jewish cultural taboo. Now you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Cut my arm off, Mom. It's not going to matter to me. One day I entered the studio and looked around. Where's my guitar, I asked. Wait, where's my amp? Oh, one of the studio employees said. They already came and picked up all the gear. What? Thieves had dispensed with any high-tech scheme and just walked in and said they were a shipping company and made off with all our gear. The easiest way out was through the front door. We got reimbursed and bought new gear, but some of my guitars, like my Flying V, had been custom-made and could never be replaced. Peter seemed to resent everything he was given. It was a no-win situation. The fact that he was given things further highlighted his inability to contribute.
Feeling what we're giving you, what the band gave you, you can't fake that. You can't replace that. It's called chemistry.
Another day I was on my way to the studio in a rental car when a police car pulled up behind me and turned on its lights and siren. I pulled over. I was wearing my usual off-duty uniform of hip-hugger jeans, really low rise, with about a 3-inch zipper, platform boots, ruffled woman's blouse, and jewelry, with my hair tumbling in long curls over my shoulders. Whoa. The officer walked over to the side of my car. License and registration, please. It's a rental. I have no idea where the registration is, I said, as I reached for my wallet. My wallet wasn't in my pocket. I left it, I don't have my wallet, I stammered. I must have left it at the hotel. Well then, the cop said, you're going to jail. What? I nearly pissed my pants. I turned as white as a sheet. Jail? Look at me. You can't take me to jail looking like this. The cop looked at me. He must have seen my terror. Be sure to carry your license next time, he said, and motioned for me to drive off. Note to self, always carry wallet.
Yeah. Norman Seeff, who had been a brain surgeon in Africa before he became a photographer, did the cover shoot for Hotter Than Hell. He was entirely competent and professional.
You know, when you mention Hotter Than Hell, the first thing that comes to mind is the cover, because it was so revolutionary.
But he was a guy who believed that when you do a photo session, you have to create a certain ambiance. Yeah. He probably explained this philosophy to us on the phone, but before we went down to his studio, we didn't know quite what to expect. When we got there, it was like stepping into another world. He had a number of girls, and they were walking around half naked with silver paint all over them. Huh? There were mirrors on the ceilings and pieces of furniture suspended from wires. The whole feel was very surreal, like the Twilight Zone. Everyone got drunk, except for me. Paul got so drunk that at the end of the shoot, we had to carry him out and lock him in the back seat of our car so he wouldn't wander away.
And I had gotten into a car accident the night before.
Ace had decided to see how well and how fast he could drive his car down a winding Beverly Hills mountain
and still make the turn at the bottom. The ultimate outcome of the experiment would have been obvious to anyone but an inebriated Ace.
As it turned out, he couldn't do it very well. He smashed up the car and his face.
I could only put makeup on half my face.
When I wasn't chasing girls, I was trying to keep Ace and Peter out of trouble. It took some doing, especially in Ace's case. Originally, Peter and Ace had roomed together, but after a while, they didn't get along. Peter asked me if I would mind if he roomed with Paul, and I roomed with Ace. It didn't bother me. We were all in the same band. One night I was going down to the hotel bar to see if there were any girls for the taking. I asked Ace if he wanted to come along. Nah, he said. You go ahead. I'll be down in a little while. I went by myself, and of course there were girls, and I started talking to them. And after a while, though, I started to wonder where Ace was. I called up to the room, and no one answered. Then I got a little worried. I got one of the hotel managers, and we went to the room and knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Finally, we smashed open the door. Ace was in the bathtub, passed out, and slumped down with the water rising. His mouth was just above the water. He would have died in a minute. He smelled like a pickled herring. We pulled him out of the water naked and put him to bed. I stayed up all night to make sure he didn't roll over and fall to the ground, which he did anyway, or throw up and choke on his own vomit. By the next morning, I was exhausted. Ace wasn't. He bounded out of bed, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. "Hey," he said, "I stayed in last night and went to bed early. What did you do?" Huh? He didn't remember a single minute of the ordeal.
Well, you know, me and Gene used to room together. I don't know how many people are aware of that, but, you know, me and Gene are a lot closer and get along a lot better than most people would think. And, you know, Gene's bark is a lot worse than his bite.
It was a strange situation because we had gotten quite famous more or less overnight, and yet very few people recognized us without the makeup. I could walk the streets or get a cup of coffee. I could even go to a newsstand and buy music magazines with photos of Kiss in them. Of course, it was different on 48th Street. I didn't look like everybody else. No. I had the blue-black hair and the street versions of my 7-inch platforms, which I wore all the time. I guess there, among all the music aficionados, people could put 2 and 2 together when they saw a 6'8" guy with mounds of blue-black curls walk in. Wow. If that guy isn't in Kiss, the circus must be in town. Though I never saw Gene as like-minded, I did see him as a partner. But to me it was clear that Gene continued to see the band as a vehicle for himself as an individual. Gene was in it for Gene. Whatever the reasons, he didn't share the collective mentality I had. I found security in the band. It provided something lacking in my life. I wanted to belong. I needed that sense of family, of camaraderie, of a support group. So for me, it was always about the team, and I coveted the band above all else.
You know, Paul is like less outgoing, you know, and I gravitated more towards Peter because, you know, after the show, a lot of times me and Peter hooked up and you know, we'll party, you know. I didn't see that much of Paul after the show, you know, so what he was doing on his own, you know, was a big question mark.
I wanted Kiss to be the best of all worlds. I loved comic books. I loved horror movies. I didn't have preconceived notions about rock bands and, quite honestly, didn't care.
Hi, I'm Gene Simmons, and you're not. No. Bass player in a rock band, which happens to be America's #1 rock band of all time in all categories, is finally going to tell you how you can make some more money and attain power.
Yeah! Knew it all, we knew nothing. When we got with Bob, I learned so much more about music and drums and theory, and he helped me write a really big record because it was a great learning experience. I really came out a better musician than when I went in. So it's one of my favorites, not just because Beth was on it. It was just a great album to do.
He carried a whistle around, and whenever he wanted to get our attention, he would say, "Campers?" Every time we thought we had done enough to satisfy him, he would come at us with something else. In some ways, he was quite a disciplinarian.
Once at the end of a take, long after a fade-out would have ended the recording, Gene stopped playing. Bob came out of the control room and ran up to him, stuck his finger so close to Gene's nose that it made his eyes cross, and said, "Don't you ever, ever stop until I tell you to stop." A trickle of sweat ran down Gene's forehead. He never stopped again.
You know, Bob was weird, and he was kind of a dictator, you know, but I love Bob.
For the first time, they couldn't take the easy way out. Ace was not about discipline. He wouldn't even show up on time. Peter has always played by feel and couldn't play the same thing twice. As a result, Bob Ezrin's time with the band was very tough for Ace and Peter, or at least that's how they saw it.
I don't really think about the process, I just do it. You know, there's people that watch other people live life, and there's other people that just do it. And I don't really think that much about what I do. I do everything kind of from the gut. If it feels right, do it. Yeah. That's kind of my motto, and it pretty much, you know, hasn't steered me wrong. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
Peter, in particular, was devastated by it. He had never had any discipline. He was a street kid. Paul and I had always been critical of Ace and Peter because they didn't get the big picture.
I worked never so hard in my life to get, and because of the drug addiction of coke, I thought like an idiot trying to keep up with Ezrin, which was an impossibility. By doing more, maybe I'd be better on the drums. The more I did, the worse it got. But I got through it. I did that album. That's me on it. Bob put me through hell, but I was a better drummer from it, It gave me a nervous breakdown, but I deserved that myself because I was killing myself thinking if all this other stuff would work.
Ace would simply leave. Sometimes he wouldn't show up at recording sessions. On one occasion, he wanted to leave early because he had a card game at 7 that evening. At some point, Bob didn't worry about Ace or his excuses. He simply got another guitar player to come in and play Ace's parts.
Many times I didn't think I was cool because maybe I didn't show up, or I was late, or I was too loaded, but, you know, it went along with the territory in those days, you know. I wouldn't do anything any differently than I did.
During the recording of Destroyer in 1975, I had another drug experience. Not an experience in which I took a drug, but the first time I ever saw cocaine cut up and ready to be snorted. A mirror was built into the control console at the recording studio, and I was clueless about its purpose. I kept on saying, "Look how stupid this is. You have to bend down to see your face." The least they could do is hang it up on the wall, and everybody would laugh. But nobody ever told me what it was for.
Okay, boys, play something a little peaceful for Mr. Lee.
Peter and Ace's contributions were never as substantial as we made them out to be in the press. The fact of the matter was that two guys, Gene and me, were the engineers and motivators and did 80% of the work. Unfortunately, when we decided to create the help illusion, we never considered the possibility that Peter and Ace would start to actually believe it and that their belief would bite us in the ass. Those fissures first started opening during Destroyer, as Peter struggled to record a song that was ostensibly his own, and we began to have to work around Ace, who spent much of the recording process with his priorities far from where they belonged. He sometimes played his parts with his rings and chains scraping against the fretboard and pickups, and then wanted to quit for the day and take off. When I would ask him to remove the jewelry and do another take because of all the noise, he would say, "Hey,
That's rock and roll.
no, Ace, that's shit."
I'm working on my second book, and this time around, I'm probably not going to be quite as nice as I was to those guys on the first book. I know their deepest, darkest secrets.
And the rest, I guess, is history.
To get the vocal for Beth, Bob had to record Peter singing the song probably a dozen times and cobble together a single version from the passable parts of those takes. Peter's chances of being able to sing a song off the cuff were about as good as my chances of throwing a penny and hitting the moon.
Well, I think singing's another talent. I got to look at it in songwriting. You know,
it would be a challenge for him to carry a tune in a bucket. Even if we sang a note to him, he couldn't find it.
It just doesn't, you know, I'm a funny guy. I get up. I'm a real down-to-earth guy. I go to the gym. I hang around. I just don't think of myself in that sort of vein. It like freaks me out if I do.
Peter may have contributed a line of lyric or two, but after hearing the original Penridge demo tape of the song, it's clear who came up with the original song.
I am an artist, always was, always will be. I'm a New York musician. I hate the word rock star. I don't use it. I don't consider myself one. I consider myself a musician.
Peter had a co-writer on every song he ever wrote because he couldn't really write. Song structure and concepts like making your lyrics rhyme were totally lost on him.
I love music, and I was around it all my life. It was always around me. I love all music, all music, not just, look, I love all music, rock, pop, jazz, everything. And I think being around it and hearing it all the time, and it's been a big influence on me. So, you know, it comes through all my stuff.
We had a few days off in LA, and I got together with Karen, the hostess from the Rainbow. I was also now in a position to rent luxury cars for my use, so one of the days in LA, I rented a 2-seater Mercedes and picked Karen up at her apartment to go for a drive up the coast. About 45 minutes on the road, it started to pour. That's when the reality hit me in the face, along with the oncoming rain, that I had no idea how to raise the top. We drove back to her place in the rain with the top still down, never speaking of the obvious. We were both soaking wet when we arrived, and I finally admitted the truth. After a quick laugh together, I got right to the most pressing issue. Do you have a hairdryer I can use?
No.
I used to have a teddy bear inside my jacket pocket. You know, it would have its arms sticking out, right? And I'd walk up to a girl and I'd go, "You want to meet my friend?" And they go, "Okay." And I open up my jacket, there'd be a little teddy bear there with his arms hanging out. And they go, oh, what a cute little teddy bear. And then we start talking.
In May 1976, we jetted off to England for a 2-month European tour. To me, England represented the musical Holy Land. Everything I loved came from there. But nearly as soon as we landed, I hated it. The food was horrible and the transportation archaic. There was no air conditioning, and if you pleaded, they might begrudgingly put one lone ice cube in a drink for you.
British nightlife was just as rewarding as American nightlife. One night we went to the Marquee Club and it was packed. I roamed around the room looking for a new friend or two. Patti Smith was standing next to the bar. I don't recall saying a word to her. I was more preoccupied by the two stunning girls standing at the far end of the room. All of a sudden, Smith turned, slapped me across my face, slurred something, and walked off. To this day, I'm clueless as to what made her do that. But it didn't take me long to walk over to the two lovelies, start dancing with both of them on the dance floor, and in short order, take them both back to the hotel. The evening at the hotel began hot and heavy. We were apparently making quite a bit of noise because there was a loud knock on my door. It was Paul. Didn't I realize, he said, that it was the middle of the night? No. Couldn't I keep the noise down? I apologized, came back in, and the girls and I moved the bed away from the wall, put the mattress on the floor, and continued on with our business. It was probably 5 in the morning when we all became ravenously hungry. I ordered a feast. It came up in a surprisingly short time. But I had inadvertently given the wrong room number, and the hotel delivered all the food to Paul's room. He was by that time in no mood to joke.
When you're on the road, man, it gets hairy. It gets crazy, and you're so together all the time. I mean, you're just constantly together as the guys. When you get to the hotel and all is said and done, you lock that door. It's wonderful, man. It's like it is another world. It's a wonderful moment of quietness, and you send up. I love to send up for an old movie and maybe some room service, and it's a magical time.
The rest of Europe wasn't quite as fulfilling as England. For starters, the accommodations were different from what we had come to expect. European hotels weren't like American hotels. They were smaller, and the plumbing didn't always work the way it was supposed to work.
Ace bought knives all along the European tour, and on the way home, he taped a bunch of them to the inside of his Marshall cabinets to sneak them into the country. It pissed me off. If they were found, all our gear would be impounded. But it was par for the course for Ace. Once on a domestic flight, our tour manager's bags had been searched and a stolen hotel phone was found. The tour manager hadn't put it in there. Ace also stashed drugs in the bags or pockets of crew members without their knowledge, so he wasn't on the hook if they were found. Ace was all about Ace, regardless of the cost to anyone else.
Had nothing to do with anything.
One night I ended up going out with Lita Ford, who was then the guitar player in the Runaways. Lita and I had some fun times together. The two of us went to a club called the Starwood for a show. The opening band, The Boys, featured George Lynch, who went on to fame in the band Dokken. The Boys played a cover of Detroit Rock City. The second band was called Van Halen. I was impressed. They had another show the next night, and I made Gene go with me to see them.
Every once in a while, I would see a band that I knew was going to be big. Van Halen was one of them. I went with Bebe Buell, a model who was friendly with a number of rock stars. She's perhaps better known today as the mother of the actress Liv Tyler. Bebe and I were going to see a band called The Boys, and opening was a new band called Van Halen. Within 2 songs, I knew they were going to be huge. Strangely, they did only okay at the club. People liked them, but it wasn't a maniacal response. But I knew. I went backstage, went over to them, and introduced myself. I went right into business mode. I wanted to know their plans. Then I produced their demo at Electric Lady Studios.
Near the end of Van Halen's set that second night, Gene got up and disappeared. Little did I know he'd gone backstage and spoken to them about taking them into a studio to record a demo. He never told me. He didn't mention it when he returned to his seat. I found out only later. It was funny because I always thought of Gene as the one member of the band I could count on, and yet he still did secretive things like that. It was that old impulse of his, and he never felt the need to explain any of what I saw as sneaky or dishonest behavior.
There are some hilarious stories about Peter. I had a liaison with a girl, and then Peter fell for her. They saw each other for a little while, and then Peter brought her phone number back home. His wife was a jealous woman and was brighter than Peter. So he hid the phone number under the stereo.
What?
His wife was cleaning one day, and she actually lifted up the stereo and found the number. So she called up this girl and said, "Hello, this is Oregon Health Department. Are you so-and-so?" The woman said, "Yes, why are you calling me?" "Well, we just need to find out if you're familiar with a Peter Criscola, who is otherwise known as Peter Criss, drummer in Kiss." "Yes?" "Well," Peter's wife said, "he may have the clap. We're trying to ascertain what period of time you may have had physical contact because you may need to get a checkup. Can you tell us the specifics?" At this, the woman came clean with the specifics. It was this time of night, in this Holiday Inn. "Thank you very much," Peter's wife said and hung up. When he came home, she had him pinned. "Peter, where were you at 7:30 at night on Monday? Were you with so-and-so?" "No."
"Taxi!"
She had him dead to rights.
Both Peter and Ace were fucked up all the time. I'd seen plenty of functional addicts. Bob Ezrin had been doing a lot of coke and chugging Remy Martin while we recorded Destroyer, but the quality of his work never flagged. Bill O'Coin, Neil Bogart, and much of the Casablanca staff were on a slippery slope doing lots of drugs too. Gene and I tried to diffuse unpleasant situations by saying, "Come on, man, that's the drugs talking." Peter and Ace would respond by insisting they knew exactly what they were saying.
I don't remember that. What was the events that surrounded it?
Peter's insecurities got more and more crippling with the addition of drugs. The whole world was against him. One day in the studio, he exploded about something and smashed my acoustic 12-string guitar against the wall. There was a moment of deafening silence after that. During another argument, Gene snapped at Peter. "Peter, you're an illiterate idiot who can't read or even talk correctly and never finished school." "Yeah," said Peter, "and I'm in the same band as you." To this day, that remains the smartest thing I ever heard Peter say.
There's only one Kiss, and that's Peter, Paul, Ace, and Gene. I don't take nothing away from those two guys. They are the men. They are the guys. But so is Ace and I, and we're just as important to the party.
A Rolling Stone writer wanted to do a story on the band. He came up to a duplex I was renting on Riverside Drive in New York to interview me for what he said would be a cover story. When I met him, I was very careful to cultivate the demon mystique. I wore all my spider and silver jewelry and my leather pants. I puffed up my hair as big as it would go, with my 7-inch platform boots with silver dollar signs on them and black nail polish. I thought I was ready to project a perfect badass rock and roll image. He was right there with me through this entire interview. Then at one point the door buzzer sounded, I answered it, and in the doorway was my mother with enough food to feed the world. Fresh hot soups, veal cutlets, pancakes, jams, cakes. She insisted that he and I think she called us hungry boys, stop what we were doing and eat. She kept calling me by my Hebrew name, Chaim, and told the writer I was a good boy. The big bad demon was just a mama's boy. But Ace and Peter lived at the edge. They bought many cars and lived in many houses. At one point, Ace built a home recording studio with poured concrete, then found he couldn't use it because his neighborhood wasn't zoned for it. Between them, they cracked up or crashed at least 10 cars. Mercedes, DeLoreans, you name it. The funniest one was Peter crashing in his garage. The fire department had to come in with the jaws of life to get him out of his car in his own garage.
The cars weren't that great. No more accidents, you know, just nice cars now.
Why did I wreck the car? Why did I blow the show? Why did I ruin the room? Why did I constantly do things I did? I was addicted to cocaine. I didn't know the downfalls of it.
Peter's a fun guy to be around.
Listen! You know, there's some people out there, some gods, that think they know what's best for you. But I think what's best for you would be a rock and roll party tonight! Are you with us? Are you with us?
That first wave of force coming from people screaming and lights coming on is very powerful. Having multitudes of people focused on you and sending you energy creates an undeniable wave of force. That might sound like some sort of New Age concept, but the feeling is staggering. The entire show carried incredible emotional weight, but by the second song, I was home. You see, I am special. And then a bottle came sailing out of the darkness and hit me in the head. In some ways, it was cool. Fans wanted to touch you in any way they could, and here was someone touching me with a bottle. Our road crew, as devoted as they were, found the guy and beat the crap out of him.
I remember getting hit in the face with an egg. Actually, an egg came flying from nowhere and got me in the eye, and I had to stop for a while. It was a good shot. My eye was black for months.
We went to Japan to play a series of sold-out shows at Budokan in Tokyo.
By March, we found ourselves touching down in Japan in a Pan Am 747 amidst a Beatles-like furor over the band.
I really like Japan.
We had arranged to pass through customs and immigration in full makeup and gear. We had it all with us on the plane and got ready when we were within a few hours of landing.
That was a great plan, except that the Japanese customs officials didn't let us into the country.
No.
Because they didn't believe that we were the same people as those pictured on our passports.
We had to remove our makeup before they'd let us in the country.
So we had to take the makeup off, pass through, and then put it back on before we went outside.
After they verified we were the people in our passport photos, we did the quickest makeup job we had ever done and then walked out to find thousands of fans waiting outside. It was pandemonium. Once we got into our cars, people swarmed over them like locusts. I got nervous and claustrophobic. Smile, Gene said calmly through clenched teeth.
The Japanese promoter had arranged to have duplicate cars, and most of the fans ran after the duplicates while we snuck out the back and jumped into other cars.
We spent the next 2 weeks attending lavish parties and making regular visits to Japanese bathhouses.
I mean, I remember once we were on tour and I woke up in Canada. I had dinner in Texas, you know, and then we ended up in Mexico City. And then I get to my hotel, and in the lobby is this really cute Mexican model. And she had blonde hair, so very rare in Mexico. So I invite her up to my room, you know, within an hour we're having sex. And I look on the TV, and she's on the TV at a commercial, like for some car or something. I just thought that was so bizarre. I just met this girl, I'm having sex with her, and she's on the television, you know? Go figure.
Controlling issue is a big thing for Gene Simmons. Paul Stanley always has been. Love to control everything.
So Ace and Peter wanted to get back to doing straight-ahead rock and roll, and we were sensitive to that. We rented out the Star Theater, a theater in upstate New York that Frank Sinatra actually had a stake in. Later on, it went out of business mysteriously after a fire.
We rented the Star Theater in Nanuet, New York, outside the city, but close enough that we could all go home at night.
We brought in Eddie Kramer and started work on the next album, Rock and Roll Over.
Eddie came on board, and we retreated to familiar territory as fast as we could. Maybe we didn't want to have a nanny this time around either, someone telling us how to do everything and blowing a whistle in our faces. We figured we'd done our apprenticeship, and Peter and Ace certainly had no desire to work with Bob again.
No.
We decided to try a more meat and potatoes approach, go back to basics.
Rock and roll, to me, I'm old school. You got to dance to it. You got to dance, man. You know, even if it's a boom ba, it's cool, man.
We recorded the songs that Paul and I had written on tour. Ace and Peter also submitted songs, most of which were, at least in our estimation, not up to par.
Any of my songs, if they're underrated or if they're pushed aside, it's because, you know, Paul and Gene are trying to minimize my content and my contribution to the band and try to make it seem like, you know, those are the two, you know, geniuses behind Kiss, which is a complete falsity.
Peter lashed out when we worked on his songs. But the problem wasn't that Gene and I rewrote his songs. The problem was that the things Peter brought in weren't songs to begin with. The lyrics never rhymed. There weren't any delineations between verse and chorus.
I love writing. I love to write pretty much what's real, what's really real.
Peter spent all his emotional energy worrying about his place in the hierarchy without the ability to be honest with himself about the quality of what he brought to the table.
You know, when I worked with Paul and Gene, it was great, and we produced some amazing things, and it was magic. But, you know, those guys they want to do things their way, you know? And, you know, we were always butting heads from time to time, you know.
There were plenty of things that Paul and I did without taking credit for. We were fairly happy. Still, talking about stability in KISS is like talking about freedom in a prison.
It's all relative.
Everybody wanted to get as many songs as they could. Everybody wants to shine for the fans, you know, but, you know.
No matter what the lunacy was, the band was together. In retrospect, it might have been a mistake. We would have saved ourselves a ton of headaches if, at the first sign of trouble, we had made changes in the band.
Today, KISS is the hottest touring group in the U.S. They're also #1 in Japan, Australia, and West Germany.
For the Love Gun Tour, which began in Canada in early July 1977 after the album was released, he had a private airplane for the first time. It was a Convair 280, a propeller plane filled with odd furniture, almost like a flying junk shop. The pilot and co-pilot were Dick and Chuck, and our flight attendant was named Judy. Dick and Chuck fought regularly and often yelled at each other in the cockpit, "You asshole, fuck you!" It wasn't very reassuring. Once at the end of a flight, we landed, got to the end of the runway, turned around, and immediately took off again. They had put us down at the international airport rather than the private airport. Another day I saw flames coming out of one of the engines mid-flight. I told Judy to bring Dick back to see it. He came back, looked out the window, and said matter-of-factly, "Don't worry about it." What? Then he returned to the cockpit. The whole operation was an accident waiting to happen. The tour itself, however, went gangbusters.
The Japanese tour took up most of March. Love Gun was released in June, and then Alive 2 followed in November. Ace and Peter continued to do the most bizarre things. Ace had a fascination with Nazi memorabilia, and in his drunken stupors, he and his best friend would make videotapes of themselves.
They're grasping at straws. I mean, Jesus Christ. My fiancé is Jewish. How could I be anti-Semitic? Is he out of his mind? 40 years in the music business, I worked alongside Jewish people my whole life. And I'm anti-Semitic? It's ridiculous.
Peter, too, was drinking heavily and using drugs. At one point, he went into a club and allegedly demanded that a certain substance be put in front of him in a bowl. The owner of the club refused, so Peter tried to intimidate him, but nothing happened. Again, he was all bark and no bite.
Drop it. You know, the gang thing in my neighborhood was much different than the gang thing today. I was a little gun runner when I was 13, and my grandmother caught me and broke a broom over my head.
Whatever.
On February 18th, 1977, we headlined our first show at the Garden, and it was sold out.
If you grew up in New York City to headline Madison Square Garden, you have made it.
CBS News had a broadcaster named Kaidi Tong. She was one of their big stars then. The cameras were all over us. While she was interviewing me, with the cameras all around me, I felt something in back of me. I turned around and my mom, all 5'4" of her, was trying to fix something to make it look right. I was wearing a thin strip of leather with studs around it, and it ran right through the crack of my butt, and my mother was trying to brush off a piece of lint or clean a spot or something.
After playing 3 nights in a row at the Garden, I knew one thing. What I had thought would fix me had not. If all these people look up to me and see me as special and a star, shouldn't I feel that way? Maybe in theory, maybe while I was on stage, but success and fame and the change in the way other people perceived me hadn't erased whatever was wrong behind the mask.
Some people warm up before they go on, vocally, you know, play scales. You know, I never did any of that stuff. I just go on stage and do it, go into the studio and do it. Boom.
Huh? It wasn't that we were breaking up, but people were starting to need their own space again.
We weren't speaking to each other. We couldn't stand each other. We wouldn't play a gig for more than a year. What do I do now?
But it was also pushing us forward into new projects. The comic book, which was published in 1978, became Marvel's biggest-selling comic book. In the mid-70s, we were popular enough that teenagers and even younger kids were buying our records. And that meant lots of other Kiss products were in demand. And it wasn't greeted with universal support from the band. Some things he saw as improper in a rock and roll context.
Gene got out of control with the merchandising. And, you know, the lunch boxes, you know, the whatever.
Man alive, can you believe all of this stuff? You know, next to the Beatles, these men were the most heavily merchandised group in all of rock and roll.
Kids started coming to the concert. You know, I mean, and we started out almost like an underground band, and then, like, you know, we obviously our following grew, but, you know, we started appealing to younger kids, 5-year-old kids. You know, and my manager would say to me, "Hey, cool it with the cursing tonight, because, you know, you got young kids in the front row and you don't want to say fuck." So,
you know, it's nice to make some money. It's great to sell merch. I thought when we were putting out the merch, you know, the little dolls and the little sleeping bags and the lunch boxes, that was very cool, but always it was the music.
We didn't care that it invalidated what we did. We were not concerned with credibility.
No.
It just looked like a lot of fun. All of a sudden, we were one of the biggest bands in the world.
In 1978, retail sales involving Kiss were approximately $117 million.
Wow. One of Bill's follies was the movie Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. He thought that film was the next step for us. The Beatles had A Hard Day's Night in Hell, and we should have our film. He sold it to us as A Hard Day's Night meets Star Wars, which had come out the year before. It would have lots of cool special effects. Nobody in the band had the slightest clue about acting. None of us read the script. We didn't care. We trusted Bill's judgment.
It's a cosmic force field which protects our talents.
Without them, no powers.
We're just ordinary human beings.
When we started filming, it didn't take an expert in the field to know we were in deep shit, and there was no getting out of it.
This is unreal.
It's all unreal.
Oh, no.
The great Bill Aucoin had a great idea of merchandising us and putting on this great, crazy show. I really felt it was like Batman meets Robin.
We had some trouble at the park last night, and, well, everything seems to point to you.
I had a lot of fun. You know, when we started shooting at Magic Mountain, they closed the park at 6 o'clock, so I had the run of the park. So I bought a moped and used to drive around all those asphalt trails between the rides.
Look, someone vandalized our park last night, smashed some of our buildings.
I crashed a few times, but luckily I had that costume on with all the padding, and I didn't get hurt.
So that's why those guards thought it was you.
Yeah. We took 2 hours to put our makeup on. By that time, Ace and Peter were miserable.
Does everybody feel good?
One, I don't care, because I got other things to do in my life, so I don't really pay attention to other people.
Wonder what his trip is.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the 4 of us weren't speaking unless we were delivering lines.
Is there something wrong, Demon?
I'm not sure.
You know, I was the peacemaker. Whenever anybody in the band fought, I try to, you know, say, "Come on, let's kiss or break up."
We've got to get out of here.
Leave it to me, Star Child.
Peter and Ace frequently left during filming.
But, I mean, the whole experience for me was pretty good. There was one day that I really kind of lost it, and that was when I had a fight with a producer.
I know rock and rollers tend to get rowdy.
What happened was I was partying the night before. We had to get up at 7 o'clock, drive to Magic Mountain. Then we had to put makeup on and costumes and stuff. So all of a sudden, somebody knocks on the door and they says, "Excuse me, Mr. Fraley, we're going to be doing close-ups on Gene Simmons all morning, and we won't need you until after lunch."
Hi, Curly.
That happened more than once, but the second time it happened, I just lost I said, "Forget it." So I ran into the producer's office. I said, "This shit's not going to fly with me." I kind of lost it. I jumped into my Mercedes and took off. My bodyguard followed me, and I like to drive fast. Anyway, I did a quick zigzag, boom, 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 went through a red light, and I lost him in 2 minutes.
When we did Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, the rest of the band was incensed. Because the newspaper ads usually showed a much larger photo of me. But the ads for the movie, and particularly those in TV Guide, really bothered Ace and Peter. They felt they weren't as involved in the film as Paul and I were. We didn't really have a choice. First of all, Peter had been involved in yet another car accident. He skidded 400 feet before he crashed, and he wound up in the hospital.
Gene's brother was an only child.
Easy, Catman. They are serious.
When he did speak in the movie, he was impossible to understand because of his thick Brooklyn accent, so his voice was dubbed by someone else. We had 2 writers with us who were writing the script for Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, and they wanted to get a sense of how everybody talked before they wrote the script. Ace in those days was non-communicative. He didn't say much. No matter what you said to him, he would make the parrot sound, "Awk!" Nobody understood it, and when he wasn't making the parrot noise, he would mumble nonsense to himself. 13 for a dozen, or "I kills them all, one by one," and then he would laugh. These phrases meant something only to Ace, and nobody had a clue what he was talking about. When the script came in, Ace's character never spoke. He only said, "Awk." Ace was furious. He wanted to know why they didn't give him any lines. To their credit, they turned around and said, "What are you, nuts? You have never said anything to us except awk. We thought that's the way you want to talk." Ace said he had a lot to say. Well, he should have said it.
Yeah, well, it is what it is.
In one scene, we had to use Ace's stunt double, who happened to be black, after Ace left without notice. It was clear as day in the final version that it wasn't Ace.
I'm not here to mess around with imposters.
He was a sweetheart because I had an argument with the producer and I stormed off in my Mercedes, and he was gracious enough to fill in for me for that shoot in the dungeon there with Frankenstein and Dracula.
Yo, could you imagine John Lennon getting bit by Dracula?
When we were on stage, I turned around and saw some random old man in cat makeup in a wig playing the drums and chewing gum. What? Peter had taken off and they threw this guy up there.
Let's find that cat, man.
I didn't know much when we did Kiss Meets the Phantom. I felt like having a good time in the park and having a great old party as far as I was concerned.
Making the movie wasn't smooth, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't particularly fun. But like almost everything else we did then, it was a success.
But it's not Kiss.
When the movie was finished, we saw it at a screening at the Screen Actors Guild Theater on Sunset Boulevard. If you thought it was bad on a TV screen, you should have seen it on the big screen. People openly laughed. I slunk down in my seat. It was humiliating.
Let's go!
Paul and Gene have gone on record that they hate the film. I think it's hysterical. It's a silly rock and roll movie, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. You know, I mean, they took the film so goddamn seriously that it just ruined it for them when they saw the final cut. Expected, Gone with the Wind. And look what we got.
The label released Donna Summer's disco anthem, Love to Love You Baby, which became a smash hit over the course of 1976. Kiss went from being the signature band on Casablanca to being part of a sideshow label. Instead of being in the company of rock bands, we shared a label with a bunch of guys dressed up like construction workers and cops and a band that wore ballet slippers. People who wanted to see us as pap or contrived had only to look at the company we were in to reinforce their suspicions. Wow. But sometimes it had a darker side that corresponded to things we overheard. As if our entrepreneurial ability weren't a positive trait, but rather a trait of deceit or manipulation, because that wasn't rock and roll. No. Barely below the surface of the band's interactions was a simmering and ongoing resentment and anger directed at me and Gene. We ran the band and wrote almost all the songs and generated the ideas. As a result, the two of them tried to sabotage the band, but of course, we kept up the mythology. 4 guys running down the street, jumping in the air, living under one roof.
I was always a fan of the Beatles, man.
Yeah, right.
I'm too old for that stuff. Life should be positive for you and me now. I mean,
this is a family.
Held a band meeting on the lot where we were shooting the movie. In response, Bill and Neil had almost immediately hit on an idea to hold us together. You don't have to leave the band, Bill said. No. We'll do solo albums. Yeah. That turned out to be our next folly.
It was like maybe the Beatles' White Album or their Sgt. Pepper.
To be totally honest with you, I never listened to any of those albums from beginning to end. Just tried to do the best album I could, and it turned out to be, the most well-received. Doesn't mean it's better.
I've worked with a lot of producers, but he set my drums up in the middle of the studio and set the musicians around me. and I set up that way, I instantly got respect as an artist. And he never told me how to drum. He respected me. We're working side by side. It's a very close relationship.
Recorded that album at a studio that used to be above Radio City. So all the Rockettes that dance in the show used to have to go past the studio, the staircase, to go up to the roof and lay in the sun, you know, scantily dressed. So that's how it got started. Sometimes we get visits by Rockettes. Sometimes we go up to the bridge, up to the roof and have a beer with them, you know. But, you know, nothing got too out of hand because I was really trying to be focused for this record.
I decided to mix my solo album in London at a legendary old school studio called Trident. I wanted to fly there on the Concorde, something I'd never done. All aboard! Somewhere over the Atlantic, it struck me that the plane wasn't level. It was flying at an angle. But what did I know? Then the pilot came on the PA and said in a calm voice,
"This is your captain speaking. Now, folks, you may have noticed we're flying at a slight angle. We've lost an engine."
Taxi!
What? We're in the middle of the fucking Atlantic with one engine.
We're on our way back to Kennedy Airport.
If we're flying on one engine, why don't we go down to about 5 feet above the water instead of 55,000 feet above it? The captain came on 10 minutes later.
We're using more fuel than expected because we're flying subsonic, so we're not going to make it to New York.
That's not good. We're going to divert to Nova Scotia. I don't like this at all. Why are we so damn high up?
I've got to get out of here. Calm down. Get a hold of yourself.
Stewardess, please let me handle this.
I've got to get taxi.
Before too long, the same calm voice came on again.
We're not going to make Nova Scotia.
Where on earth are we going to go?
We're going to land at Gander Airport in Newfoundland. We need a long runway.
We made it to Gander and landed. They paired people up and shuttled us off to a local motel. I said there was no fucking way I was bunking with someone. No. The next day, a DC-10 made an unscheduled stop and picked us up. What should have taken 3.5 hours ended up taking 17 hours. But once in London, I enjoyed it this time.
The only other song I did from anybody else was Bobby Lewis's Tossin' and Turn. And I always liked it because I have insomnia. And I can't sleep at night. Nope. And it's a great tune. And it is. I love it, you know. And the other tune, You Matter to Me, I don't know who wrote it. It's the only 2 tunes I'm doing from somebody else. All the rest I've written myself.
On another occasion, I had Janis Ian at the studio at the same time Grace Slick came down to record with me. I had met Grace on tour because she was seeing our lighting director and would visit him on the road. Janis, Sean, and I were discussing some ideas when suddenly all hell broke loose. Grace had apparently ingested some chemical that didn't agree with her constitution. She flipped out, and studio staff helped her out of the studio.
When I met Anton, he was like this green. He was very green. He hadn't played with a lot of famous people. You know, I don't even have to tell him what to do. I'll just look at him, and he does the drum fill.
It's an old style that we know about that I brought back, and to them it'll be a new sound all over again. I mean, music is a circle, clothing's a circle, everything's a circle. It comes back.
Well, I just wanted to make the best record possible, and you know, I had a revelation after all 4 albums came out, and mine became the most successful. Try to get Gene to admit it, though. You're wrong. You're wrong.
After 20-plus years of sales figures, I'm at the top, slightly ahead of Ace.
No.
Who is slightly ahead of Paul. Huh? Peters sold the least well of the 4.
Not by any fault of his own. It was just, you know, drummers never get the, you know, they never get the attention that like a lead guitar player gets, or Paul Stanley's front man, you know, Gene sticking out his tongue, flying, you know, up into the light truss, you know.
None of the albums really yielded hits. The song that got the farthest was Ace's cover of a song called New York Groove.
I'm back in the New York Groove. Pretty much, you know, there's this voice in my head going, you know, Ace, you're a lot more creative away from those guys than you are with them. So that was kind of the beginning of the end for me. I was also drinking and doing a lot of drugs, so that could have affected my decision making.
The solo album was a big boost for Ace.
Withstood the test of time. You know, 40 years later, it's still a great record.
For the first time, he was thrilled because he could walk into a room and be the only star. The guy who had his own thing going on, his own album with his own face on the cover. The irony was that when he first joined the band, he didn't want to sing or write songs. He just wanted to be the guitar player. We had forced him to start writing songs. He was able to put out an album that in a lot of ways was probably the most cohesive of the four.
The solo albums did quell the need for Ace and Peter to leave, but they represented nothing more than a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
And doing 4 solo albums and still being in Kiss is great.
Nobody wanted to talk about the records because they didn't want to admit mine was the best.
The headaches with the other 2 guys in the band continued. Peter was depressed. Ace was as infuriating as ever, and both of them were increasingly being controlled by substances.
You know, I've seen other UFOs. I think one landed in my on my property in Yorktown, New York.
Oh, no. Ace's behavior was probably more interesting, although no less maddening.
Well, you got to remember in those days, kind of me and Peter were a little loaded. So, you know, things kind of flew over our heads. I had a saying, give me a 6-pack of beer and lock me in a closet and I'll be happy. I guess it's the German in me, you know, I love beer. Whoa. Paul and Gene were kind of taking care of business a lot more than me and Peter. You know, on touring and stuff, you know, we were pretty much party animals, you know. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I did it, believe me.
Ace has always struck me as never living up to his potential.
I never took a guitar lesson, and just about every day somebody comes up to me and says, you know, if it wasn't for you, I never would have picked up a guitar. You know, and I feel guilty because I never took a guitar lesson. I go, you're idolizing an idiot.
What? He's admitted to being chronically lazy and a flake.
Paul and Gene are workaholics, and, you know, I like to take more time off and relax. I mean, I'm going to be honest, folks. I'm a little lazy. I'm going to admit it, but it's okay because when I do create, it's genius.
I've never been high, and I don't have much use for small talk. Whenever I spoke to Ace and Peter, it was to get information. Who, what, why, when, where, and how.
Bada bing, bada boom, bada bing.
They just didn't deal well with that. We would have numerous meetings before a tour or recording session, and they just couldn't sit still. They'd be cracking jokes and throwing food at each other, and every time at the end of the meeting they would ask me, what was that about? What? Or a day later they would ask, okay, when are we going to talk about the album?
I haven't been asked, so...
And I would have to explain that we had talked about it, and that they had agreed to certain terms. Nothing would stick. No. Ace and Peter didn't take notes, didn't read memos. This was always a problem, but in 1979 the stakes were much higher.
ABC may bring you 1979.
With these kinds of headaches in the band, there were plenty of times I would have preferred to stay with Cher. But whenever I sat down and thought seriously about things, I realized that at least at that point I would never risk breaking the band up or leaving. It was all-inclusive and invasive. So in one way I sort of forgot that I had any options. I gave myself completely to the band and defined myself that way. I was Gene Simmons from Kiss. From Kiss might as well have been my last name.
We were like brothers. And then all of a sudden we became multimillionaires, and then like everybody started going their own way.
The best watches, the best car, you know.
You know, Gene started dating Cher and Diana Ross.
After a little while in California, I got distracted a bit from the rock and roll world. Even though I had always loved movies and wanted to explore that field.
You know, Paul was out here doing something. You know, Peter's doing this, you know, I'm crashing race cars and getting loaded. It was like too much too soon. It happens, especially in the entertainment business. But thank God I'm still here, God.
There's nothing worth fighting about except health and money, and the rest is okay.
My problem was I was just, you know, doing too much, way too much. I mean, I was with John Belushi 2 weeks before he passed away. You know, we were partying together. We used to go on 3-day coke runs, and I mean, we had fun. But you know what I used to do? I used to take seltzer and pour High-Gident cough syrup into it. And it looked like cranberry juice, but it was really cough syrup.
People magazine did a couple of cover stories about Cher's and my relationship, and though I was used to the idea that photographers tried to capture me without my Kiss makeup, this kicked it up tremendously. We were constantly hounded by paparazzi, night and day. I started covering my face with handkerchiefs like a bandit. Once we went into a Westwood store, and Cher and her sister Georgianne decided to walk down the street for a second. I said, "I'll just look around the bookstore." I was wearing Samoans and very short shorts for the first time, standard issue California dress. And I saw a couple pointing toward me, and I'm going, "Yeah, what are you looking at?" "Okay, so I'm in Kiss, and I'm dressed this way, and I'm browsing in a bookstore." Big deal. It's a New York thing. You're confrontational. "So what? So I'm in Kiss." So they turned around and walked away. When I walked over to Cher, I told her about it. Can you imagine those people were staring at me?
They weren't looking at you. Your balls are hanging out from your shorts.
I looked down, and sure enough, they were. They might as well have had a neon sign around them.
That's rock and roll.
Yeah. We were talking about meeting in New York to record a new album. This one we decided to call Dynasty. Dynasty was recorded in New York City with Vinnie Poncia,
who had produced Peter's solo album to appease Peter.
Paul and I had met with Vinnie at Bill Aucoin's suggestion, in part to show Peter that we thought well of his record and to bring him back into the fold. Ironically, Vinnie decided that even though he produced Peter's record, he didn't think Peter was good enough to drum on a Kiss record.
He didn't want Peter to play on Dynasty despite their relationship.
Peter was not qualified to make any judgments about material or arrangements, he said. In Vinnie Poncia's estimation, Peter was close to tone deaf and didn't play drums very well.
I'm not going to play if my heart and my soul and everything, my whole being isn't into it. I wanted out. I wasn't happy. I thought the band was going Vegas. You know, now we got purple, red, green, orange, blue. It had nothing to do with the silver and black, real kick-ass colors.
Peter was recovering from a car accident, and, had become addicted to pain pills and stuff, so he really wasn't up for the task. God bless Peter, but, it wasn't working at that time.
For Peter, Vinnie was a buddy. But for Vinnie, this was a job, and Peter was no longer capable of playing what was asked for and needed.
We had always been able to placate him before, but this time, under even more pressure, he became harder to control.
Anton had been in an Aucoin-managed band called Spider and had played on Ace's solo LP. We worked out a deal. Anton was paid well, but we weren't paying for secrecy. Rumors did swirl that Peter wasn't on the album, but we never felt the need to address them. We never thought about actually kicking Peter out, at least not yet.
I had more leverage, but I also had more confidence.
With Vinnie at the helm, the album wasn't really a rock album. No. But then again, we weren't really a rock band anymore. We were a bunch of rich guys who lacked a primal spirit.
Some critics say they don't make music, they just make noise. One thing is sure, they do make money.
I think the only thing that's silly about a reviewer that's going to put down our show, some people say we can't play, but there's no way you can ignore, 20,000 screaming fans.
When I'm on stage, I feel invincible, I feel beautiful, I feel needed by masses, and I'm proud of myself.
I soon realized that I didn't want to teach. I simply wanted to be on stage, and I wanted people to look at me and listen to every single utterance that comes out of my precious mouth.
What was musically acceptable to us broadened over time. For some people, it was fine that we did things our way, until we didn't do things their way. That constituted a betrayal. Studio 54 was a den of iniquity. It was sordid to a level and degree that I wasn't completely comfortable with. It was hardcore debauchery, sexual relations between everybody and anybody, and drugs everywhere. It was beyond me.
I used to hang out at Studio 54, and I partied with a lot of celebrities.
But I loved going there to dance.
It was crazy. I remember going upstairs into Steve Rebell's office, and, he'd lay out a big mountain of coke for me. It was that insane, and then there'd be a big bag of money. on the floor. It was crazy. You know, I got a chance to hang out with a lot of movie stars when I was there, which probably I would have had a chance to do in a lot of other places. So, you know, I remember one night I was dancing with the Bionic Woman, Lindsay Wagner. I remember hanging out with Nick Nolte, Mick Jagger, Alice Cooper, and I liked it there. You know why I liked it? Because there was a lot of VIPs, and at that time, you know, Kiss was probably the biggest they were ever, and I didn't get bothered by fans, you know, so I could kick back and enjoy myself and get loaded without people bugging me. I think that's why a lot of famous people went there.
I went home and set a drum machine to 126 beats per minute and sat down and started I Was Made for Loving You. It's funny that some Kiss fans think the song has a sanitized connotation of disco because it was written in a musical whorehouse.
For me, it's hard to play because, you know, by the end of the song, my wrist starts cramping up because I'm playing the The only break I get is when I do the guitar solo. It wasn't indicative of the sound of Kiss.
No apologies for a hit that people worldwide still want to hear and sing along to.
I mean, you can't take away the fact that it was such a huge hit and appealed to so many people.
As we got ready to finish Dynasty, Bill Aucoin alerted us to the idea of a Return of Kiss campaign.
The Return of Kiss.
And told us that we were going in for a cover shoot with Scavullo, the big fashion photographer. He put us in straitjackets. We got the photos done, and they looked great. A few days later, we did a video session for a series of television commercials keyed to the same theme. That session went less smoothly. The director insisted on take after take, and the day was getting longer. Peter was especially unhappy with the way it was going. So he ran into the bathroom and started to complain. Bill Aucoin tried to calm Peter down. Peter then got so upset, either with himself or with the way things were going, and I assumed that the chemicals in his system had something to do with it, that he took his fist and smashed it into a glass case so hard that a shard went right through his hand. He had to be taken to a hospital and stitched up. Now there was a question whether there was even going to be a tour, whether Peter's damaged tendons would allow him to use his right hand at all.
No, we were horrified.
Our initial thought right away was for Peter's safety, because we lived with him and cared about him, no matter the consistent torture he put us through. But afterward, when the shock of the accident wore off, Paul and I got angry. Oh my God, we would say, what an idiot. Can you imagine being so upset at anything that you drive your fist through a glass case?
Yeah.
The whole James Dean lifestyle had never appealed to me. Because after that guy dies in a car crash, I'm gonna sleep with his girlfriend.
What?
And,
They were pissed off. They weren't too happy.
True confession time. Huh? True confession time. Exclusive on the Tom Snyder program.
The ultimate Kiss interview. I still get people telling me, man, the Tom Snyder thing ruled. We had such a great night, Ace and I, that night. It was so good that we could let it all out and let it all go and watch their faces through that whole interview. And I watch it even till today. I fall on the floor hysterical.
But you're kind of like a spaceman, huh?
No, actually, I'm a plumber. On the side.
Hey, well, listen, I got a little piece of pipe backstage I'd like to have you work on.
Tell me about it.
I think there was no repercussions. Ace and I would be like, okay, so you didn't like it, all right, gone. We were out of there. We had a ball. I wish we could do more of those things. Those were the good times, buddy.
I had to go back to New York and start getting ready for the next Kiss tour, and I wanted Cher and the kids to come live with me. And when Cher saw my condo, she said it wasn't big enough and moved into the Pierre Hotel. It soon became clear that if I wanted Cher to be with me in New York, I would have to finally buy a home that would suit her. So I went shopping for a larger place. Cher and I were refused at the Dakota, where John Lennon lived. No. We were deemed to be too much trouble, because the press was on our tail night and day. I finally found a space I thought she would like. the top floor of the former Heart Fund building on the corner of 5th Avenue and 64th Street, across from the Children's Zoo at Central Park. There was nothing on the top floor then, so I bought air rights, which meant that I could build a dwelling on the entire top floor of the existing building. While their penthouse was being built, Kiss went out on tour. When we came back home, I took the elevator up to the penthouse. It opened up into my floor. It was a showpiece. Cher loved it, and so did I. The problem was that by the time it was finished, Cher and I had stopped being lovers and went back to being friends. The thing that threw Cher a little bit was the photography. Since 1976 or so, I had been taking pictures of the girls I had been with. I didn't do it without their knowledge or compliance. In fact, most of the girls were thrilled about it. It was a hobby of mine, partly to keep things exciting and partly as a kind of documentary. At one point, I told Cher about the photographs. She was shocked. She didn't understand why I would want to do that.
The show we mounted to support the release of Dynasty was no longer a rock show. It was more like H.R. Puffin stuff on ice. It was something that perhaps in some ways we consciously maneuvered toward.
Paul was going to have a laser coming out of his eye. I was going to have the laser coming out of my guitar. Because of what happened with Blue Oyster Cult, they blinded somebody in concert. All of a sudden, all these regulations came down really heavy on using lasers live. So they had routed out a channel through my guitar neck for the fiber optic, for the laser. So we just pulled that out, we ran wires through it, and I ended up connecting rockets. So it went from a laser to shooting rockets, and I think the rockets were a better effect.
We spent years in court trying to get our money back for that laser curtain.
There's contracts in this business I'm in, and there's lawyers, which I love to shoot. Nothing against all you lawyers, it's just that I have a hard time with you guys.
Bill brought in a choreographer named Kenny Ortega to try to tinker with the show. Kenny went on to work on stage shows from Michael Jackson and Cher, movies like Dirty Dancing, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and High School Musical, and the music video that some blame for killing Billy Squier's career, Rock Me Tonight. Oops. Bill also brought in a guy named Joe Gannon to work as a stage manager and direct our show like a Broadway musical.
To up the stakes even more, I got the bright idea of having a rig built to fly me up to the light system, 55 feet above the ground. Every night, I would throw up the blood that had been hidden in my mouth during the previous blackout, stand there erect and proud, and wait for the audience to give me my due. I would demand it. And although at that point I felt powerful, the feeling would quickly dissipate as I was flying straight up through the air at 6 feet a second. I was scared stiff every night. And I kept thinking to myself every time I flew up there in the dark, what an idiot I was to have got myself into this mess.
Yeah. We wore ridiculous outfits for the Dynasty tour. Yeah. We had sanitized ourselves and were well on our way to extinguishing the fire that had propelled us so far. We stayed at a hotel opposite the Forum in LA when we played there, and I looked out the window and broke out in a cold sweat because I saw so many kids and families standing in line, which at that time could only backfire on us. The line could just as easily have been for the circus. There was an upside, though. I saw a lot of apparently single moms with their kids in tow. What? I could tell somebody, blonde mom in row 3, have her and Junior come backstage after the show, and then send Junior off for a tour of the stage. But it was all wrong.
Yeah. The four of us had been feeling our way through our own lives, getting a little breathing room. Now here we were, right back in the thick of things. The tour was huge, and both Ace and Peter were so miserable they turned on each other, and for a moment actually swung at each other. They both cried and fell into each other's arms afterward.
Peter was completely unmanageable. Whatever we did was never right. No. If we let him sleep late on a day off, he would get angry and say he wanted to travel on the off day. If we traveled on an off day, he would say he wanted to sleep. If he said it was too hot backstage, we turned up the air conditioning. Then he complained it was too cold. One time he punched a mirror and got a serious deep cut on his hand that needed microsurgery and stitches. It wasn't unusual for Peter to throw his drumsticks at me or Gene or Ace if we stepped in front of his drum riser. Never mind that he was up on a drum riser, meaning we didn't block the audience's view of Peter even if we did pass in front of his kit. If he wants to be at the front of the stage, he should learn to play the damn guitar.
I really wanted to sort of be a good boy again and really work this out. And it was already, I could see their wheels turning. And yeah, it got worse. The more power, the more money, the bigger arenas, the bigger stuff. It got more and more. I felt I was really treated.
But then one night, near the end of the tour in December 1979, Peter had been binging on drugs and playing particularly erratically. When I turned around during one song and let him know his tempo was too frantic, his reaction was to start slowing songs down and then speeding them up again, apparently out of spite. That crossed the line. Immediately after the show, Gene, Ace, and I spoke about it. We were all stunned by the betrayal. The unspoken rule had always been that you left your shit in the dressing room. No matter what was going on, when we went on stage, we were a band. The stage was sacred. Peter's purposeful sabotaging of the show was the ultimate treachery. We decided we wanted Peter gone. Ace can say whatever he wants now, but he voted to fire Peter without any prodding or strong-arming. It's a tribute to Ace that he did. We called Bill and told him we had to get rid of Peter. No. We said we wanted to cancel the rest of the shows and go home. No. How could we go on? Bill smoothed things over enough to get us to delay taking action and continue the tour rather than fire Peter immediately.
He would put us in a room and lock the door. You guys, I'm fed up with this. It's been going on for half the tour. I'm locking the door. I don't care what you do to the furniture. And I want it done, but because we got a long tour to go. And we would settle and we would work it out.
We had just a few dates left. Peter didn't see the train that was about to hit him, but that was par for the course.
It was 1980. Time for another album. Once we started working on Unmasked, it became clear that Peter's chemical problems had become major and that he needed some serious help.
Immediately after the end of the tour in mid-December 1979, Peter married his second wife, Deborah Jensen, a Playboy playmate. The situation was weird. I couldn't help but wonder, would she marry him if she realized she was marrying the former drummer of Kiss?
See, Larry was like a therapist. He took up therapy. It was really therapeutic for me, where I would say, I don't think I should say that. That's like a little nasty. That seems that seems a little uncool. He said, just say it, Peter. Just get it off your chest and say it like you're telling me about it, how upsetting it was for you in that moment, in that dressing room, or that car, or that hotel. You need to say it, man. You need to tell your fans the truth. You need it for yourself to tell the truth. And trust me on this, please. I went to a lot of emotional breakdown on a lot of things. I just thought maybe I shouldn't say. I should say it. Or this needs to be said, and it wasn't said. Being treated like a second-hand citizen was heart-rendering for me. You know, if you do it wrong, we'll fire you. If you don't do this right, there's the door. They had the power. I'm going to pull a plug, and that's the end of this. I paid my dues.
The decision to use a different drummer on the album was just the first step in dealing with Peter. We honestly weren't sure what to do with him. He had been with the band since we started, and Kiss was an extremely loyal organization. Toward the end of the recording sessions, Poncia asked him to come in and add some harmonies on selected songs. They didn't go very well either.
Early in 1980, Bill had to break the news to Peter that he was out. No. But instead, Bill persuaded the other three of us that we should give Peter a second chance.
Look, he said, you guys have a tour to do. I don't want to get another drummer.
So we didn't finalize a decision, and after a few months, a period when we were off the road anyway, recording Unmasked with Anton Fig on drums again and Vinny producing, we agreed to have Peter come back and try playing with us.
This was a kind of balancing act that Paul and I were used to. 1 year making Peter feel better about himself, the next year doing the same thing for Ace.
Anton Fig was a member of Kiss for 1 day, and this is how it transpired. We were looking to audition drummers, you know. When we did that, we auditioned about a dozen drummers, and Eric Carr was one of them, and we all know the history behind Eric Carr. Sure. But prior to that happening, I called up Paul and Gene and I said, because I had been working with Anton Fig on my solo record, and I said, why don't we get Anton Fig to play drums? And they both agreed. So I called up Anton, I said, you're in the band. He was thrilled. He couldn't sleep all night. And then the next day I got a call from Paul and Gene, and they said, you know, maybe Anton Fig isn't such a good idea. because me and him, we used to party together all the time, and they figured, it might be a little dissension in the group because of that. So I had to do the dirty work, call back Anton and tell him, sorry, Anton, you're not in the band. So for 24 hours, Anton was in KISS. He was like, he was elated, and then he was let down.
In the interim, Bill had arranged for Peter to take drum lessons from Jim Chapin, a famous jazz drummer.
So we set up a meeting at SIR Rehearsal Studios in New York. And at the appointed time, Peter appeared,
carrying a music stand and sheet music. The first thing he said was, I'll have to have all your songs on sheet music because I read music now.
The kind that symphony orchestra players have, with a clip for the sheet music. He looked very serious and intense.
I whispered to Gene, are we on candid camera?
You guys, he said, I've completely changed my life around. I've been studying drums and music for the past 6 months, and I can read music. I'm completely better.
Peter sat down, put his sheet music on the stand, and studied it for a while.
I looked at the music sheets incredulously, and then at him. Can you read and write music, Peter? Sure, he said. What? Then mumbled something, but I couldn't make head or tail of it.
Mind you, this was a rehearsal of old material, not the new stuff we had written and recorded for Unmasked.
Then we started playing, and he was worse than ever.
The rehearsal did not go well. It was over.
So we had a meeting afterwards, and we said, Peter is unhealthy. He's going to kill himself. He's got to leave the band and get some help.
My philosophy had always been that if somebody was drowning, you tried to save the person. But when they started to pull you under, you cut them loose. That's what was happening.
So after much deliberation, everybody, including Ace, voted him out of the band.
All the talking and advice and trying to get him help got us nowhere.
For years, people wanted to see Peter Criss.
He was here in makeup the last time, and tonight he is here in his real face.
Starting over again by myself. 10 years. I mean, if the Beatles could break up, I could leave something, and I love the Beatles. And leaving the band, I thought about it for at least 3 years. It wasn't an overnight decision for me. And it was long coming since when I wrote Beth, and I felt so proud of having a #1 record. It kind of gave me a lot of initiative to say, well, man, I'd like to do more of that. And I was kind of being held back in a sense as an artist of not having my fair share of abuse, I call it. And I just didn't get enough tunes, and it was getting really frustrating for me. And towards like the last tour, we did something like 90 shows, and I said that, I went on after I got married, went on my honeymoon, I was in Brazil, and I said, that's it, I try, and it's not fair for them or myself to go up there, and it's not fair to the audience, and I'm not giving, I called it 110, and I told the guys when I got back, and they were shocked, and they felt bad, and they said, is that what you really want to do, Peter? And I says, look it, man, I played for 60,000 as people, and as far as financially, I'm very comfortable, and it's not the money, guys, it's the music. I'm really hurting as an artist. I got to break out, and I got to try my own thing. And was I really that good to get a People's Choice Award or be up for 2 Grammys? So
we shot a video for the song Shandy after the decision to let Peter go had been confirmed. He came to the video shoot knowing it was the last time he would appear with KISS. At the end of the day, he took his makeup case with him and left. It wasn't tearful, but it was a big moment. Peter was leaving. We had fired him, and this was the last time we were going to see him in the band. Oddly enough, Peter didn't seem to care. He was likely in his own drug haze and saw this as his big opportunity. In his mind, he wrote the biggest song we ever had, and now he was free to go out and become the big star he should be. Wow, Peter's gone. It's the end of something. But the end of what?
It's what I always wanted to do. That's all I ever wanted to do, was to be in the band that I wanted to be in, and that was KISS.
The last thing I expected was to meet another woman and start another serious relationship. It was Christmas time, and I had to return to New York from California to audition new drummers to replace Peter. I was talking to Cher, because we were still close, and she asked me to get her a Christmas present. I don't know what to buy you for Christmas, I said.
Go and talk to my friend Diana. She'll show you what I like. We shop at the same places.
This was Diana Ross, who had begun her career with the Supremes. When I came into New York, I tracked down Diana on the phone, and she invited me over to her place. I sat there and we talked.
We had credit cards, but we'd never seen actual money. Still, the idea of having a gold credit card was a big deal. My parents had never had credit cards, and since the bills went to Glickman Marks, who took care of paying them, the cards lent a sense of unreality to the act of buying things. I had a little magical piece of plastic that allowed me to take things out of stores. Now that we suddenly had a chunk of money from the new record deal, I decided I wanted to buy an apartment instead of continuing to rent. At first, I wanted to look at places overlooking Central Park along Fifth Avenue. When I explained this to a real estate agent, she said to me, "I can take you to the places you want to see, or I can take you to the places that will let you in." "What do you mean?" I asked. No. She started talking about nouveau riche and about being an entertainer. She paused. Then she said the buildings along the park were owned by blue bloods and old money. She might as well have said, "You're a Jew," which I would learn was indeed unspoken grounds for being rejected by many of the prime buildings I was interested in. Eventually I settled on a place on 80th Street and Madison Avenue, 1 block from Central Park and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I finally owned my own shelter, my home, my sanctuary, my refuge. It felt very different from renting. The bathroom had a tub as big and deep as a small pool. One day I was paging through Penthouse magazine and I liked the look of the woman on the cover. I called Bill Aucoin's secretary and said, "Find her." A few days later, she was in that massive tub with me. Cliché or not, there we were with a bottle of Dom Perignon. Not long after, my mom asked me whether I was seeing anyone special. I smiled and told her to pick up the most recent Penthouse. Needless to say, she was speechless at some of the very revealing shots. One morning, a woman called me, and after we talked for a few minutes, I said, "That was a really great time last night." And she said, "Yeah? Who do you think this is?"
It's Britney, bitch.
Oops. What? Another time, I went to pick up a former Playboy playmate at a new apartment she'd moved into. When I rang the doorbell, a different woman I'd been seeing answered the door. They had moved in together and decided not to tell me. They thought it was hilarious. Believe me, if you saw these two, I was lucky to be the brunt of the joke. I was living a triple life. There was the star child. There was me without the makeup, the perceived me, that is. And then there was the real me who, despite fame and adulation, still felt insecure. There was a reason I spent most of my time in my apartment, sometimes with women, often alone. Some people took me for snobby or aloof, but the truth was I was still shy and insecure. It wasn't that I didn't want to talk to people and make friends, it was that I couldn't. I still had just one ear and was deaf on one side. I still shrank back in social situations. I didn't know what was going to happen with my band, which was the only support structure I knew. Now what? Unmasked tanked in the States, and we spent most of 1980 inactive. We didn't have a drummer anyway. The single Shandy was a hit abroad, however, and we booked a tour of Europe and Australia for the fall. But before we could play live, we needed a drummer.
Auditions were held in downtown New York City. Hundreds of people auditioned.
Bill placed a cryptic ad in some music magazines, and we also spread the word. Bill started to get tapes and photos and bios and lots of phone calls. He went through the materials, and we periodically invited groups of potential replacements he had filtered to audition with us. We decided we didn't want a drummer who played like Peter.
Finally, we got in this guy who was a stove cleaner in White Plains, New York, whose name was Paul Caravello.
They found me under a cabbage leaf, which is what Paul usually says.
And I was pretty much living on the gutter at the time, at that time. So what happened this particular day is that I think I was lying down somewhere at 60th and Madison, and this limo went by and sideswiped me, and it just happened to be the limo that Gene, Paul, and Ace were riding in. And they jumped out, and they were very, very worried, and they felt really bad.
No, actually what happened is that I found out absolutely by accident about the auditions.
Should I say it? Yeah, I can say that. I was repairing gas ranges in the daytime. Anyway,
He was great from the start, cute as a button, with a heart of gold.
Called the office and I said, well, I want to audition for KISS. What do I do? And they gave me the information that I should put together.
I was given a list of songs to learn in the event that I was going to be auditioned, for the band. And it was 5 songs. And I went home and I practiced them, for a few days, over and over and over again, until I had them backwards and forwards. It's something I never expected to even be called for an audition. But, when it happened, I just had a feeling deep down inside that I was going to get it.
At first, I wasn't blown away by his playing, but everyone else in the room, including Vinnie Poncia and Bill Aucoin, thought he was great. We brought the guy back for a second time, and he turned out to have a good voice with the same raspy quality Peter had.
Yeah.
He was also a quick learner.
At the end of the audition, he actually got up, thanked us, and said, "Before I leave, can I have your autograph?" It struck us all, even Ace, as being a sweet thing.
I couldn't tell who Gene was. I knew who Paul was right away, because he looked pretty much the same way to me. And I think I knew who Ace was when he came in, you know. But it was exciting.
We immediately decided he should be in the band. We called him up and offered him the job, and he couldn't believe it.
You know, I was one of the last 3 guys to audition for them.
We had found our guy.
We changed his name from Paul Caravello to Eric Carr.
Paul wanted to change his name, and we wanted him to change it too. His first suggestion was Rusty Blades, which we vetoed quickly. What? Thankfully, the name game was short-lived when his second suggestion was Eric Carr, a name that sidestepped any obvious cartoon rock star moniker.
Yeah. And we even went out and bought him a Porsche, so he wouldn't feel substandard.
And we wanted him to know he wouldn't be a second-class citizen in KISS.
Thank you.
We wanted him to know that he was in the fold, that he was one of us.
I somehow became the guy who was supposed to watch over him and groom him, teach him. He approached me after he got the car. "Can I have it painted camouflage?"
Yeah.
"Absolutely not," I said.
Oh, okay.
I had gone over to his apartment a couple of times. We wrote songs together, you know, Breakout, me and Eric, you know, penned together.
Then I took him shopping at a place called the French Jeans Store. They sold, surprise, French jeans. I helped him pick out a new wardrobe. He'd need it since we were leaving for a European tour soon.
Bringing Eric into the band the way we did, just before a tour, with very little preparation and tons of enthusiasm, was like living the beginning of our careers all over again. It was an astonishing thing to watch him take on his new role, and to watch ourselves try to integrate him. First, there was the matter of his personality within the band.
When Peter left, nobody ever thought of, like, what are we going to do for a new guy? That never, you know, occurred to anybody. So it's like if the janitor came in or somebody delivering pizza came in and had an idea for a new character, you know, we would have listened to him because nobody knew what to do.
What was his character going to be? What was his makeup going to be? Was he going to be an elephant or a giraffe?
Well, I was going to be an iguana, but I didn't like I didn't like those little fins on my back. They just were like really, you know, bothering me, and it was hard to play drums with those claw fingers and everything. No, he's just going, what is this guy?
It took some time to figure out a character for Eric. Heaven forbid we put him in a character people already knew.
Yeah.
That seemed too obvious to us, and maybe sacrilegious.
For a while, we decided that Eric would look like a hawk.
I spent weeks trying to come up with hawk makeup. Okay.
We had a costume built with a protruding chest and feathers all over it.
You're gonna love this story.
God.
I went to Brooks Van Horn, which does a lot of Broadway shows. It cost them $20,000 or $30,000 for this. They put me in a yellow, like an orange-yellow unitard, you know, dance skin. Then a vest that had feathers on it, yellow feathers. Then another vest on top of that that was padded to make me look like a pigeon chest. Yellow feathers, all right? And to top this ensemble, a huge cape like what Gene used to wear in yellow-orange feathers. No, man, it was unbelievable. You know, if the fans hated me, I wouldn't have blamed them.
Yeah, so I was going to be like Mr. Chicken.
It was horrible.
Yeah, but who cares? We're having fun.
But later he came up with a fox persona.
You know, the proverbial light bulbs, you know, over our heads went off. And from that second on, it just made sense to be the fox. We redesigned the costume, and I became the fox.
And, boom, you got it.
This is Gene Simmons of KISS, and I'd like to introduce you to
Paul Stanley of KISS, who wants to introduce you to Ace Frehley of KISS. What's the name of the new drummer?
I think his name is, his name is Eric Carr, and he's incredible.
Okay.
Now get out of here. For the first week, though, he did have to wear diapers.
Yeah, thank you.
He wore the same size boots as Peter, so we used existing boots and had the platforms built up even more. The boots ended up being like stilts, and he still looked tiny next to us.
So please give a big hand for the Fox, Eric Carr.
We introduced him by playing at the Palladium in New York City to a crowd of about 3,000 people. That was the Trial of Fire, and he passed with flying colors.
I don't even remember that show. I don't remember anything except that I took a big chunk out of my knee backstage running around, that I didn't realize that I had done that until I got back to the hotel. And I saw like blood dripping down my leg. It only changed once. It changed, the only time I wore it, the original version was at the Palladium show and on the cover of the People magazine. Bill Aucoin told me the next day that you couldn't really read it from the audience because it was too much black. So I made it smaller, I got rid of the silver outline, I put white down the center. I just streamlined it more and it looked a lot cooler.
Eric got thrown in at the deep end of the pool. We had become comfortable dealing with the world we operated in. Basic stuff, like handling women's sexual advances and the media, or acting properly in a restaurant. Eric had to learn on the fly.
Then we went off to Europe, taking Bon Jovi on their first European tour. Everything was brand new for Eric. He was wide-eyed as we started our European tour, and not used to the kind of fame we were experiencing.
Domenica 31 agosto è il giorno dei Kiss.
The second night of the tour, on August 31st, 1980, in Genoa, Italy, we heard a commotion outside the locker room that was serving as our dressing room at the sports arena where we were playing. Then, we started to hear people chanting, "Kiss fascista! Kiss fascista!" Security started screaming, "Lock the doors!"
Run for your life!
Baseball bats started pounding on the door and smashing things outside. They wanted to kill us.
You guys have guns?
It was bad enough that we were going to get killed for playing music, but worse still that I was apparently going to die in platform boots and makeup. We consciously avoided espousing any political views, and yet, to them, we represented all the evils of American capitalism.
One night, we were in a hotel in England, and he was downstairs in the bar. There were girls there, as always. One of them introduced herself as a photographer for Melody Maker, a British music industry paper. Eric talked to her for a while and gave her the complete new rock star rap.
When I see a girl, you turn my head, you make me dizzy.
At one point, he asked her if she wanted to come up and take nude pictures of him. She said sure. So they went up, and apparently he had told her, "Look, these pictures are just for you." She said that she understood completely. Eric got into a bathtub nude, holding a champagne glass, with shades on, and this big mop-top head of hair.
It was great. I love it.
Apparently, they didn't spend the night together.
Not really.
After she took the pictures, she took off. The next day, Eric related the story to us. We doubled over laughing. It was like Trust on the Road 101. "Are you out of your mind?" we said.
"Huh?
You let her take pictures."
"Oh my God," he said. "You think she will?"
But she said they were just for herself.
"This girl is going to print those photos." Eric protested for a second. But then the truth dawned on him.
Sure enough, when the next week's issue of the Journalist magazine came out, there was Eric looking like an idiot, naked in the bathtub with his huge head of hair and a glass of champagne. He closed his eyes. What a schmuck.
Everywhere we went with Eric, he was just like that. He was never malicious. He worked hard. He showed up on time. He was a complete professional.
The Fox, man.
First night we were in Paris, Eric wore a brand new white suit to dinner, his first. Not 10 minutes into the night, he spilled a huge glass of red wine all over it. At times like that, he would close his eyes and mutter, "What a schmuck." He sent that suit to the cleaner so many times, hoping against hope the stain would come out, that when it finally came back white, the sleeves fell off when he put the jacket on.
We have a problem here.
He was impressed that we could get by on a little pidgin version of the local language on that first tour across Europe. Wow. In Paris, he decided he wanted to try.
All right, Paris!
How do you ask for butter in French? Well, I said, "S'il vous plaît" is please, and what you want is papouge. The French word for butter is beurre. I made up the word papouge. The waitress came over to our table and Eric said, "Papouge, s'il vous plaît." She looked at him and said,
Papouge?
He did this thing we used to call the Ronald Reagan, where his head would start to shake from side to side when he got nervous. He did that now. "Papouge," he repeated with his head shaking. We had fun messing with Eric on that tour. It was like having a little brother around. Another night, he really liked the food we'd had, which had come on a sizzling hot plate. Eric was still like Oliver Twist in those days. "Please, sir, may I have some more?" The waiter brought another searing hot plate, carrying it with tongs, and Eric reached up and grabbed it with his bare hands. You could hear the tss sound as it singed his fingers.
Oh, it was great.
Another night in France, a guy at a nightclub started hitting on Eric, making him uncomfortable. He went over to Ace and said, "That guy over there is trying to come on to me." Ace, in his inimitable logic, said, "Let's make out so he thinks we're together. Then he'll leave you alone." And the kissing began. Armed military personnel guarded the airports in some parts of Europe back then. One time, at an airport where security had AK-47s, Eric got pulled aside.
He showed up in a camouflage outfit with an ammunition belt around him. All the bullets were hollow, but it wasn't immediately apparent. And at any rate, it wasn't the kind of thing you brought to an airport.
I agree with you totally, you know.
He was wearing a camouflage jumpsuit and bullet belts. They took him through a door and out of our sight.
They thought he was wearing a wig because his hair was so big.
Nah.
"What's under there?" they asked. I mean, they really went from top to bottom.
But he was back surprisingly quickly. "What happened?" we asked.
You're gonna love this story.
I told them I'm a musician, he said. So they took me to another room and had me play a piano.
He even had an anal inspection.
Tell me about it! Let's not get technical here.
He was protesting all the way.
That's it.
"What are you talking about? I'm from White Plains."
Yeah, what are we talking about here?
Once he played a little piano, they let him go.
While Peter had complained constantly, Eric was more than fun to have around. He was terrific.
You betcha.
The atmosphere in the band was much better without Peter's constant negativity to contend with. It was eye-opening what a difference it made. We had alleviated such a huge problem and so much uncertainty, strife, and hostility. It was as if the sun had suddenly come out, and that was only Peter. Ace was still in a downward spiral, but at least now we had half as much turmoil.
This is Ace Frehley. I'm very spaced out. And that's exactly what this show needs. Rock on.
Hi, and I'm Eric the Fox. And what this show needs is the Foxy. Come on. Come on, guys. This show needs all the help it can get.
Ace had lost an ally, but he hadn't lost a buddy. Whatever relationship he'd had with Peter was strictly mercenary. Ace was smart, and he manipulated Peter to help him vote for things he wanted.
I always thought outside the box.
We've got a birthday present for you. This is a boot from, one of our past concerts.
If he missed Peter at all, it was on that level, not as a friend. Now it was me and Gene and this other guy who didn't have the same seniority or power as a full member.
Whoa.
Ace was the odd man out as far as the decision-making process. I knew it bothered him, but it wasn't an immediate issue while we were on tour.
After Europe, we went to Australia. At that point, we were the biggest thing the Australians had ever seen.
When we arrived in Australia for the first time in November 1980, it quickly became clear that things were going to be crazy. We'd been told KISS was massive there, but you never know what to expect. You can only comprehend things you've already experienced. Australia was like nothing we'd ever experienced.
1 in every 14 people in that country had bought a KISS record.
Whoa.
We played multiple dates in soccer stadiums when nobody else had ever played stadiums there. The first band to ever play stadiums anywhere in the world was the Beatles at Shea Stadium. People don't realize that before then, bands just didn't get to be that big.
Huge here meant not being able to leave the hotel. It meant taking a helicopter from the hotel to the stadium we were playing. The phenomenon we witnessed became known there as Kissteria. We had an entire floor of the hotel with one suite devoted to our own Australian public relations staff. And no wonder, since we were on the front page of the newspapers every day, accompanied by headlines like "KISS and Midnight Cruise on Sydney Harbor."
There were terrorist attacks and wars being fought, but on the cover there was nothing but the band. Kiss Army invades Australia.
The Kiss Army has marched through Melbourne, leaving a trail of debris at VFL Park, and more than 40,000 fans are static, if slightly deaf.
VFL Park this morning was a mess. Broken chairs, smashed bottles, and debris inside and outside the ground.
Paparazzi camped in front of the hotel, and whenever we went anywhere, we had to hide on the floors of vans.
Everyone's not only enjoying the country very much, but the fans have been just spectacular.
Fans hung on the fences to see Kiss leave. A racing convoy of cars with band members taking off their makeup as they went.
Well, it wasn't as good as I expected, I must admit, but the kids loved it.
Oh, it was fantastic. It was terrific. Fair income.
Wow. Fever reached its peak in Melbourne last night at the group's only concert at VFL Park. John Mangos reports that more than 45,000 enthusiastic fans saw the most spectacular rock and roll concert in Melbourne's history.
Every single night, the promoters threw parties which were packed with models and actresses. Some parties were women only.
At these parties, Ace would get blitzed. An Aussie pressman became one of Ace's drinking buddies. And at one of the parties, while everyone was sitting around talking, Ace and the gentleman started making out. I don't really believe that Ace pitched for the other team, but it wouldn't matter if he did. It was clear, however, after he got enough alcohol into his system, all bets were off.
Talk to my attorney.
He would lose his inhibitions and think nothing of kissing and making out with men.
I was doing an interview yesterday on a radio station in Atlanta, Georgia, and that was one question they hit me with on the air. Is Paul Stanley homosexual? I said, you got to ask Paul Stanley. I don't know. I don't judge people by their bedroom tastes. So, what anybody wants to do behind closed doors is all right with me, as long as it doesn't affect me in a negative way,
Ace and Peter would think nothing of kissing each other. I think this was an infatuation on both their parts with the Godfather culture that had become very popular with them, a sort of a we know the right people attitude, proof that they shared a bond. With Peter being Italian and Ace always threatening to call the right people to do his dirty work if he wasn't treated well.
Gene has single-handedly alienated just about everybody on the planet. First he attacks immigrants, and then he belittles poor people by saying, you be nice to the rich people because we're the ones that give you jobs, Then he attacks people with depression, alcoholics, drug addicts, the only thing left for him to do is attack, the whole gay movement. And, I've heard him do that in private, so that's probably still yet to come.
Eric, however, would often leave the parties and go out and befriend some waif he met on the street. He identified with the fans.
I love fans and stuff. I do.
Maybe he felt more like them than like one of us at that point. Yeah. He sometimes brought girls to his room who had been camping outside trying to catch a glimpse of the band. For his comfort, he chose women like that over models and penthouse pets. Issues shape personalities.
It was wonderful. Every night the kids were out there, they were screaming.
During one of those lavish private parties on the Australian tour, Eric became fascinated by one girl in the club. He was wearing a camouflage outfit again, and everyone else was dressed for nightlife. The guys in leather jackets and frilly shirts, and the girls in very little. Except for this one girl, who looked like a female version of Eric, in a woman's camouflage outfit. She was very beautiful, and very shapely. But Eric didn't want to go over, so I arranged for the girl to come over and talk to him. And the two of them really hit it off. He was in the process of convincing her to come back to the hotel, and she kind of laughed and said, "Look, I can't go back with you. I'm married." Eric backed off immediately. I was amazed. "What's the problem?" I said. "If you want her to come, just invite her, and then it's up to her. Whether she's married or not, it's her choice." So he told her where we were going to be next. Melbourne, I think. And wouldn't you know it, she decided to come to see him. She got on a plane and flew to meet us. Most guys would have been thrilled.
One day he rented a car and driver to spend a day in the countryside with a girl he'd met.
But Eric was so nervous that by the end of the day,
he was so nervous, he told us, that he got awful gas and had to stop the car every 10 minutes to go to the bathroom.
And it wasn't the kind of gas you could get rid of silently.
deadly silence.
They were all of the 1812 overture variety. Needless to say, the girl didn't hang out for long.
He was depressed afterwards about what an idiot he felt like.
It was always like that with Eric. Something would always happen to him.
On the last tour I did in Australia with Kiss, I mean, it was just a pleasure playing with Eric because, you know, on and off the stage, he's a solid guy, and I never had a problem with Eric, unlike some other people.
Eric wrote a long letter in response to a girl who'd written him. Eric was always very emotional. After he replied to one letter, he ended up having something of a friendship with this girl from Phoenix. He couldn't wait to see her. After our sound check, Eric left, and I noticed a stunning girl in a red dress standing at the back of the empty hall. Oh, no! She had on makeup, perfume, the whole thing. As was my custom, I brought her into my office, which was the backstage bathroom, and threw her on the floor. We had an exchange, shall we say. We became very close friends in a number of positions, and there was a photo session afterward. There always was. Then she happily left. Later that evening, as we were putting on our makeup, I told Eric about my liaison. He wasn't really listening. He was still preoccupied with his Phoenix girl. So we started talking about that, and I happened to ask him how he would know her, since they had never met. Well, he said, she told me she'd be wearing a red dress. As he was telling me what she looked like,
the horror of it dawned on me.
Huh? What?
I showed him the photos from the afternoon's meet and greet and asked, is this her? Well, he was devastated. I apologized. I told him I didn't know, and that wasn't even the end of it. That night back at the hotel, the two of them met, and he was very upset with her. They fought, and he threw her out. And she came down the hall for a second visit with me. Oops. For me, it was about fun and games. If you go to a beauty pageant, and there are 4 girls there, do you really care who you wind up with? What? But since it was all so new to him, it really affected him.
Just because I'm a drummer doesn't mean I'm stupid, you know.
Pretty much Paul and Gene treated him like, you know, he was an employee. And I used to take him on the side and said, don't worry about it, everything's going to be okay, buddy. I was always like the guy, whenever there was an argument or dissension in the band, I would always try to, you know, heal it. Probably because I'm a Taurus and I don't like confrontation, usually. But don't fuck with me.
Whoa. The first hints of Eric's trouble started to come out too. He also went on about how he was losing his hair. His hair was so big that when he moved forward, it moved backwards. It was always moving in the opposite direction from the rest of him. And yet he constantly wanted me to look at his head. Look, is it thinning here? No. And strangest of all, Eric struggled with the idea that he wasn't the original drummer of the band. I didn't understand it. I mean, of course he wasn't the original drummer. He was the second drummer. So what? There was no talking him out of his funk when he started obsessing over the fact that he would never be the first drummer.
Eric Carr, by the way, I couldn't have been any happier for a guy to sit in that seat when I left the band. I thought he was one of the best drummers I've ever heard of, they ever had.
You know, obviously, of course, it was an uncomfortable situation for Peter and for me. I've seen Peter and hung out with him a few times. But, you know, it's never going to be one of those situations where we're going to be best of buddies because it's uncomfortable. The thing I always liked about Kiss, you know, beyond the music that I knew, is that the visual thing was so great. I really loved it, and I would walk past newsstands and stuff like that and say, man, you know, this is the kind of band that I wish that I was in.
The Unmasked tour had been a turbulent one for the band. To make matters worse, the band and Bill Aucoin had a meeting and decided to confront me about going Hollywood. They said, and rightfully so, that because my relationship with Diana and before that with Cher was so public, it changed the fans' perspective of Kiss. We'd always been outsiders who never fraternized with other celebrities, and now there I was actually having relationships with these women. It just wasn't rock and roll, I was told. No. All this inner turmoil in the band wasn't helping Ace's mental well-being.
Not really.
Aucoin no longer seemed to have the spark of leadership. Eric was simply happy to be in there and hardly ever voiced an opinion. I was not the favorite guy in the band at the time. No. Although he liked Eric very much, He couldn't really hang out with him because Eric wouldn't get high.
I became good friends with him. You know, we even, used to have a couple of beers together. Nothing crazy. No. Because he was too afraid to get fired by Paul and Gene, What?
So, more and more, Ace went off to Las Vegas with his friends and gambled and drank and drove his fast cars too fast.
That's rock and roll.
Back home, the band had more time off. Even though we hadn't toured in the States for a full year, we figured we'd make another record first. We decided to work with Bob Ezrin again, the producer who had served as our captain in Svengali for Destroyer.
Probably our best studio album. We contacted him, and he decided he wanted to work on a new record with us.
The problem was that the stuff we were writing was no better than the songs on Unmasked. In fact, it was probably worse. We'd lost the plot.
I had some ideas for movies and television shows. From those initial meetings in Hollywood, I came up with the idea for The Elder. I wasn't sure whether it would be a record or a movie. All I knew at first was a line that stuck in my head. When the earth was young, they were already old. When Bob Ezrin read my short story, he said, "Well, this is great. We should do a concept record about your short story."
Gene quickly bought into it and came up with a generic, vague, typical concept. It was about a kid who was the chosen one.
Matter of fact, I think you're gonna like this one.
Bill got behind the idea too.
Ezrin made this announcement to the band and said we were going to try to make all of our songs fit around this one central idea.
Yeah, we were intending it to be some sort of either a full-length feature or a TV show or a special or an animated thing, whatever. Because the music is basically like a soundtrack for a movie.
Whoa. Let's put out an album that makes a statement, he told us. One that shows everybody how talented you are. Trying to show people how talented and bright you are is the best way to make an idiot of yourself. And we ended up doing that with Flying Colors.
We put all the songs in the pot and got busy rewriting some lyrics, and soon enough, we had a rough storyline.
Looking back, we wanted peer acceptance and critical approval and lost sight of the fact that none of that had mattered to us in the beginning. Finally, we would make an album that garnered critical acclaim, our masterpiece.
We started rehearsing in Ace's home studio in Connecticut, but almost immediately there were problems. The first being that Ace had no intention of leaving Connecticut for Toronto.
No.
Also, Ezrin made it clear to Ace that his material was not going to wind up on the album.
What?
Or at least not very much of it, because it wasn't impressing him. And Bob himself was having some substance problems. It was a very unhealthy situation for all of us.
I had my first big studio when I got that house in Connecticut, and we recorded a lot of The Elder there. It was dug out underground. It was a sub-basement. We dug out a side of a hill. I mean, God, I don't know how many yards of dirt, but I mean, the bulldozers were going for days. And it was all poured concrete, skylight, and then there was just like one concrete wall with a giant glass brick window and a door about 18 feet tall. It was crazy.
Bob decided we should move up to Toronto and cut the record there. Also, as much as Paul and I trusted Bob's instincts and supported his idea, Ace opposed it.
Ace didn't even travel to Toronto. It's all well and good for him to say in retrospect that he didn't like the musical direction the band was taking, but the fact is that even if we had been doing exactly what he wanted to do musically, he was too wasted to play. He didn't need an excuse to drink. He was a drunk. He was bombed all the time.
Eric showed us that he was leagues beyond Peter by teaching himself how to play guitar and co-writing a song I helped him with called Under the Rose. He became a real contributing member of the band, even to the point of dealing with the facts of Kiss life. For example, I had written a song called I, one of whose lines was, "I don't need to get wasted, it only holds me down, 'cause I got a will of my own and the guts to stand alone." The chorus went, "Because I believe in me." That had always been my philosophy. So I decided to write a song about it. I was excited about recording I, but Ezrin didn't feel that Eric's drumming was cutting it on that song. and he brought in a session player. With Peter, that would have resulted in major trauma. Eric, though he wasn't happy about it, dealt with it.
The songs we recorded had no teeth. We were gumming the music at that point. We had forsaken everything we loved and embraced. If only we had realized.
The Elder came at a strange time in the band's history. For starters, we were no longer with Casablanca Records. Neil Bogart had been bought out by Polygram, and we went from recording for a label where we had a personal relationship with the president to recording for a large entity called Polygram with an enormous staff. We felt lost.
When we were finally finished in September, we went back to New York. For the cover, we intended to use my hand instead of a model's hand. But the day before the photo shoot, I slammed my finger in a window and had a purple nail that had to be retouched. This should have been an omen.
Yeah. The Elder was, when it first came out, and for a long time, was not a very popular album, you know, with the fans because it was such a different kind of thing for us.
Music from the Elder.
Elder wasn't a bad record. Yeah, I've always said this, you know, when people talk to me about the Elder. It's not that the Elder was a bad record, it was the wrong record for that period of time. I think people were expecting something more like Creatures of the Night, you know, but when Paul, Gene, and Bob said to me, let's do this concept record about, you know, this old guy, and it was never really, they never really defined the thing. It was just some kind of weird thing.
It's very, very different than anything else that Kiss has ever done. I know a lot of people, you know, were shocked by it, so was I. But it's a great album. There's a lot of good material on it. I can't say any more than that.
Unfortunately, all the work that went into The Elder seemed to be for nothing. It didn't even go gold.
I don't know. I was getting high a lot in those days. And but I just didn't think that the whole concept of the Elder was the right feel.
The reaction at the end of the listening session was like the audience when they heard Springtime for Hitler from the producers. Mouths wide open.
Bye-bye, Tata, goodbye, Gaya.
I already knew somehow that it wasn't because the sheer greatness of the album had taken their breath away.
No one paid any attention to what I was saying, and of course, the record bombed. And when you look back in history, everybody goes, yeah, Ace was right and everybody else was wrong. But, you know, if you listen to the record today and it stands on its own, it's not a bad album at all. Amazing guitar solos on that record as well.
The record label hated the album. It was originally sequenced in a way that vaguely told a story. But that meant you didn't get to anything that resembled a rock song for quite a while. So they made us change the order. As if it wasn't already bad enough, they basically did the equivalent of tearing all the pages out of a book, throwing them up in the air, and then binding them back together again. In preparation for the launch, we also changed our image to accommodate how we now chose to look offstage. We didn't want to have long hair anymore. I had razor-cut hair, a bandana around my head, I still needed to hide my ear, and a necklace that looked like I got it from Chiquita Banana. Gene had a little braided ponytail hanging over his shoulder. Ace was still in the photos even though he had in essence left the band. I went into a record store down on 8th Street in the Village the day the album came out in November 1981 and saw a poster for it. I had a panic attack. I looked at the poster and it hit me like a sledgehammer. What the hell have we done?
Actually, it sold better than Creatures because it was the next Kiss album. People didn't really know what to expect, so the Kiss fans bought it. And once they bought it and got more afraid of what was happening, you know, I think it turned a lot of fans off for the next album.
The group Kiss kicks off a 60-city American tour this February. The group dropped out of the American music scene for a while, but we found them gearing up for an exciting comeback.
The men in the mysterious makeup disappeared over the past several months. With Kiss, it's not so much a case of where are they now, but where did they go?
We pretty much left the country 2 years ago.
We truly were at a crossroads. We had cut our hair, though we still wore makeup. We had a new member in the band, Eric, and we were trying to figure out what to do in the wake of the Elder's disappointing performance. We were not going to tour with a record that didn't sell. So we turned our attention to television and videos.
And now, from our studios in the heartbeat of New York City, Times Square. Oh, my. Oh, hello. Hey.
The top. Do you feel much more serious about your work than the critics, or did that hurt you?
We always have. We've always been very, very serious about the music.
We shot A World Without Heroes, which was co-written by myself, Lou Reed, Paul, and Bob Ezrin, and would later be covered on one of Cher's records.
Please welcome Kiss.
We also shot a video of I, which would have the dubious distinction of charting in the top 10 only in Italy. We did a whirlwind promo tour of Europe and made television appearances.
Kiss!
We then went to Mexico City, where Kiss was huge.
Yo quisiera que pudieran hacer algunas preguntas
We
nuestros
love
fans,
you anyway,
nuestros
but
admiradores.
we sure would love to find out.
Claro que te queremos mucho, Jimmy, pero ¿podría?
On the way into the city, the limo was playing one of 4 different radio stations that had Kiss radio programs. Programs that did nothing but play Kiss songs and interviews for 4 hours. At the Mexico City Hotel, we were feted by the Mexican record company. We were given gold record awards and hosted the press in full Kiss makeup. Ace took the opportunity to piss into a large bottle and put it next to the other bottles of champagne. But though it was a funny moment, it signaled what was about to happen.
One of the most exciting live performances you can ever go to is a concert by our next guests. Kiss!
Those guys never had any street sense. And it's not that, it's no fault of their own. You know, Gene grew up in Israel, and Paul grew up in Queens, but he wasn't a guy like me who hung out on the corner candy store and got into fights and, you know, did crazy stuff. So, you know, I always had my pulse on what was going on, and I knew at the time, I mean, I would have bet $1 million that album was going to fail. I didn't want it to fail.
All of a sudden now, there's been a lot of interest in the album again, and I get a lot of fan mail. Fans come over, and they're always talking about The Elder now. It's like, you know, where did this come from? So I guess people are kind of rediscovering it, and just now that it's like an older album, it's not like what's happening now. You can just put it on and listen to it and say, well, you know, this is really cool, and not worry about what the direction of the band was going to be. That was the problem at that point.
We had arranged to be on the Eurovision television show, shown throughout Europe to millions of people.
Ciao Italia, ciao Sanremo, ciao Festival, ciao da tutti. Qui siamo allo Studio 54 di New York.
Here was an opportunity to reach a lot of people and perhaps resurrect a dying record. We scheduled a live broadcast feed of us lip-syncing to I from the stage of Studio 54 in New York. When the clock hit 10, we would be on, live. Ace never showed up. We sent limos and George Sewitt, our security guard, to Ace's home. But on returning, he said Ace was close to comatose. The show had to go on.
For the first time in the history of the band, we didn't do a tour following the release of the album. In fact, 2 full years would pass between the end of the 1980 Australian tour and the next time we played live in late December 1982. I grew a beard. I spent the bulk of my time one-on-one with a number of women, either ones I knew around New York or ones I flew in from elsewhere.
Girls come up to me, and they're a little older. They go, "Hi, remember me?" And my first question is, did I fuck you? Because I can't remember, I was loaded. I mean, I'm not perfect. You know, I've had numerous affairs.
No.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well, nowhere near the amount Gene's been with.
Huh?
Well, you know, Gene has had a love affair with women since he was young, you know. You know, Gene, you know. What? Whatever.
A swimsuit model I was seeing at the time said to me, "You'll never be happy because you're so tough on people and so judgmental." She was right. At the time, I didn't realize just how right. That was how I functioned, how I controlled the world around me. Everything had its place. I controlled my environment.
Whatever.
But I didn't really live in it. Now, I'm not crying in my beer because hanging around with beautiful women was like spending my days and nights at Disneyland, no matter what my motivation was. And it certainly beat the alternative way people dealt with similar feelings of emptiness, like filling it with drugs, surrounding themselves with people who constantly told them how great they were, or winding up blue on the bathroom floor.
Not really. You know, the problem with them is they're bonded at the hip because of Kiss and the makeup and the whole Kiss machine.
The allure of buying fancy things was wearing off. I realized while the band was idle that it wasn't about what I could buy with the money. It was about what I didn't have to do. Simply put, money gives you the ability to stop worrying about money. At the end of the day, you're still the same good guy or the same prick you've always been.
I never said I was more than I am.
Or in my case, the same scared little kid.
You're also weak, you know it makes me ill.
Yeah, I mean, you know.
But I needed to try something else to address the fundamental unease inside me. Then, during a visit to my therapist, Dr. Hilson, he said,
"Don't like you now, it probably never will.
I found a guy for you." What do you mean?
You're not well.
I found somebody who I think can do reconstructive surgery on your ear. I was excited. I wanted 2 ears. Suddenly, I had hope. I hoped having 2 ears and erasing that constant reminder of my childhood would help me feel more complete on the inside. I wanted to move on. The healing process after the skin grafts didn't go so well. I had to stay in the hospital for a few weeks as they monitored and worked to correct the problems. My parents and niece were there with me in New Hampshire. Gene came too. He was going through a period of being very afraid to fly, so I gave him a lot of credit for visiting and really appreciated it. Finally healed, I cut my hair short and started hanging out in an Upper West Side watering hole called Cafe Central. I decided to take a break from spending time in music circles. Cafe Central was more of an actor's hangout, a bar with tables, and people spent entire nights table hopping. Regulars included Christopher Reeves, Peter Weller, Raul Julia, and Al Pacino, and Bruce Willis was a bartender for a time. If musicians bored me with talk of gear and guitars, I soon found out that most of the actors I met wanted to talk about only themselves. They seemed to endure listening to their peers only so they would get a turn to talk about themselves. Still, I welcomed the change of scenery for a while. I started going to the theater almost every week. I had a ticket broker and I'd call and say, "What have you got for tonight?" I found it interesting that so many people in New York, myself included, talked about the culture of the city but never actually experienced it. I took some acting classes too. I sat in on Lee Strasberg's classes once or twice. At one class, a woman got up to do a scene in front of him and broke down crying before she started the scene. This is nuts. I thought you acted from joy, not torment. No. One night when I was out at a restaurant having dinner, the actress Donna Dixon and a model friend of hers walked in. Donna was staggeringly attractive, so much so that it was intimidating.
She looks like a pretty clean lady.
So much so that I went for the woman who turned out to be her roommate. Donna was just too beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
But after I had seen her friend a few times, I admitted to myself and to her that I was actually interested in Donna. And somehow it worked. I started seeing Donna. I loved having such a gorgeous girlfriend.
Polygram decided to release a greatest hits record in Europe only that was to be called Killers. We needed 4 new songs for it, so we got together with a producer named Michael Jackson, whom Paul and I liked very much. He came from a different musical background.
He was very introspective and intellectual, and we began to hit it off.
On meeting him, I strongly urged him to do something about his name. I mean, 2 Michael Jacksons just wouldn't fly. No. I suggested Michael James Jackson, and he did change it to that.
Also, even though I wasn't sure what he had to offer musically, we needed someone. I knew that Gene and I weren't at a point where we could be productive together because neither of us wanted to compromise our respective musical ideas.
The writing process started. It was clear things would be different. Ace was nowhere to be found.
No. I needed to get away.
I wanted to go to Studio 54 and enjoy my stardom.
We would deal with that issue when and if we had to, but for now we had work to do.
They're a little upset.
The 4 new songs were all written by Paul and co-writers. I was completely distracted by Hollywood and movies, and my songwriting as a consequence suffered greatly. I was approached by Marcy Carsey to try out for a show to be called Grotus. I would be the star. I shot a short pilot, and everyone seemed to like it enough to get me in front of the ABC staff. There were 10 people around a table, and we chatted for 5 minutes. Then they offered me my own TV series. I was stunned. I went outside with my business guy, who explained the deal to me. Aucoin and the band were not happy with me being on TV. No. This confirmed for them what they told me earlier, that I had gone Hollywood, the worst thing you could do back then. The band was in turmoil. Ace was miserable.
What the hell's going on?
Aucoin was slacking. Eric was disillusioned.
You betcha.
And Paul felt betrayed by my interest in television. And my fans weren't happy either. The press was having the field day talking about the beast from Kiss, who was dating the Motown diva. The fans turned on me because of it. If I had wanted to live my own life, and if this was the price I had to pay, so be it. But in the end, I didn't do the TV show. I stayed with the band. At one point, Paul drove up to Ace's house to find out what was wrong.
We went to the mall, drove around, talked. Don't leave, I told him. Stay in the band.
No.
I found out years later that he didn't remember I had been there.
Oh, okay. Well, after all the alcohol and drugs I've done over the years, you know, I lost a few brain cells, so my memory's not what it used to be.
Many pages of Ace's past are now blank. That's how blasted he was. He was living in a constant state of blackout.
I've done it all. You know, I have no regrets.
Ace launched into a long speech about how he needed a solo career. Paul very reasonably told him he could have both.
Oh, no.
Ace rejected the idea out of hand, and it became patently obvious that he was going to leave Kiss.
Well, yeah, the whole idea behind rock and roll is supposed to be fun. You know, you get out there, you listen to music, and it makes you happy. You know, Kiss used to be fun for me. You know, when it got to the point where it wasn't fun anymore, I quit.
Bill worked out a deal to let Ace leave, but have him make promotional appearances for the next album, which we planned to make in Los Angeles. In some ways, I was glad Ace finally left.
Oh, I didn't care.
We couldn't go anywhere with him the way he was.
Well, you know, how can I complain when I'm late and I'm loaded?
By 1982, things weren't going well between the band and Bill Aucoin. At the end of the day, the numbers we expected weren't there. Bill, as it turned out, was a terrific idea guy, but he didn't seem to know how to make the best use of the money.
Bill had gone from being our visionary mentor, our manager, a father figure, a fifth member of the band, to being a delusional, drugged-out whack job.
At the same time that Killers was being done, we started writing seriously for a new album that we imagined as a heavy record, a big guitar record, to get back to who we were.
Finally, after Gene, Eric Carr, and I convened in L.A. to start work on the next album, Creatures of the Night, Gene and I discussed parting ways with Bill. It would be a monumental change. Despite what was going wrong, all the good stuff during the formative years wouldn't have happened without Bill. But we realized we had reached a point where rebuilding Kiss was going to mean getting rid of everything we had known. I even suggested we take our makeup off to make a complete break with the past. Oh, no. In the end, Gene didn't want to take off the makeup, but we did decide that Bill had to go. When we arrived at his office, Bill said, "I know why you're here." "It's time," we said. Not a lot of A-list producers were knocking at our door. No. In fact, people weren't even returning our phone calls.
We're sorry.
Michael, it turned out, had no real experience with rock and roll bands, though he had just worked with Jesse Colin Young, the founder of the band The Youngbloods, who had had some hits in the 1960s. Gene and I never wrote songs together anymore.
What about the songwriting in Creatures of the Night? How did you guys collaborate on that, or what were the efforts that went into it?
We've got friends, co-writers that we think understand what it is we're trying to do.
Michael brought up the idea of bringing in outside songwriters to work on the record with us. I suggested Bryan Adams. When we flew him to LA though, Bryan ended up writing with Gene, and they came up with War Machine.
The material was strong. We were excited, the three of us. I say the three of us because Ace, once again, was nowhere to be found.
Creatures of the Night, I don't think I played much on.
He never showed up, never played a single note on the record.
There's a song called Don't Leave Me Lonely that Bryan Adams recorded, and it was on his Cuts Like a Knife album. I wrote all the music and the chorus, Don't Leave Me Lonely, the words and the melody. I played the drums, bass, all the rhythm guitars. I did all the background vocals and a lead vocal on that song. If you know that song, you know that it's not right for Creatures. So we just didn't use it, and Bryan used it.
We knew that Eric was talented enough to be a kind of John Bonham figure, and that in addition, he could actually sing.
Yeah, I play guitar, and I play keyboards, piano anyway, bass guitar, which by the way, true Kiss fans will know this. Played bass on I Still Love You. I was very, very happy about that. It was great. I had a good time doing it.
Unfortunately, him and I never said, let's sit down and write together, because we were working a lot. My writing collaborations were mainly with Gene and with Paul, so unfortunately, I never really had that moment with Eric.
I was doing an interview with Billboard magazine, and they said, Ace, what would have happened if The Elder never happened? And you went from your last album, Pride to The Elder, to Creatures of the Night. And I thought for a second, because I like Creatures of the Night. Me down. It's heavy, it's powerful, it's everything I said we should be doing when we were recording The Elder.
Do you think you're good role models for MTV viewers?
I like to roll around in the sack, no. I'm just a wild, crazy kid from the Bronx, that saw a spaceship one day and went haywire. I mean, I was drinking at the time, but not that much.
You gotta be proud of who you are. And you should be proud of what you're into.
Yeah, I may not have quit the band, but, you can't rewrite history unless we go into a time warp or a black hole. You sure?
In the face of his inevitable departure, we tried to move things along as smoothly as possible.
I had decided to leave the group, before that album started. With the success of my 1978 solo album,
we put his face on the cover and pretended that he played on the album, although he never appeared once.
What? With Ace gone, we put the word out that we were looking for a new guitar slinger.
The search for a new guitarist started almost immediately. We used 5 or 6 different guitar players on Creatures of the Night.
Richie Sambora, who was in a newly formed band called Bon Jovi, flew in from New Jersey to audition. He wasn't yet the consummate player he would become, and he didn't get the gig. It's funny, but years later I heard him saying he hadn't really wanted the job because he wanted to be in something more blues-based. First of all, it's hard to imagine that he flew to California to audition for Kiss just because he liked airplane food. Also, Bon Jovi's done a lot of great things, but they don't sit next to Howlin' Wolf in my record collection. No. Another person I spoke to was a really sweet young kid named Saul Hudson. He told me his mom had been a seamstress for David Bowie and that his friends called him Slash. He was very well-spoken and engaging, but he seemed really young. I'll be 17 next month, he said. I had turned 30 earlier that year, and Gene was twice this kid's age. I wished him well and always remembered him because he was so nice and unaffected. In the end, a lot of different people played solos on Creatures of the Night. It was a way to try people out and to see who might fit the feel of a given track.
We weren't the only unhappy band on Earth. During that time, Eddie Van Halen came down to the studio and played the beginnings of what would become Jump for us. I took him to lunch and he told me how unhappy he was in Van Halen, how David Lee Roth was driving him nuts. He wanted to know whether I would consider taking him into Kiss, because he had heard we were looking for a lead guitarist. I didn't think he was serious.
He listened to some of the stuff we had, including a solo on the title track by Steve Farris. Wow, why don't you get that guy? Asked Eddie. He was blown away. The fact was, we had rehearsed with Farris, but the fit hadn't been right. Eddie was really unhappy at the time and called me at home a few times. He seemed to be looking to me for answers, but I was never sure what the question was.
We had lunch across from the record plant recording studios, and I listened to him tell me his troubles. Vinnie Vincent was with us. Vinnie at this point was a contributing songwriter and lead guitarist on the Creatures record Only. We thought Kiss with Eddie Van Halen on lead guitar was certainly an exciting idea, but if it came to pass, what would his makeup character be? We thought it better for Kiss to find an unknown and for Eddie to go back to Van Halen.
I wrote the songs Creatures of the Night and Danger with a guy named Adam Mitchell who had been in a Canadian band called The Paupers. Adam had also written with a guitar player named Vincent Cusano, and even though Adam didn't have a lot of nice things to say about Vinnie as a person, he said he was a very talented singer-songwriter and that his guitar playing might fit Kiss. People always talked about Vinnie's talent and ability, but they never had good things to say about him as a person.
They had their choice, you know. There was people all over the world that you know, would have done anything, and so I would have too, you know.
The first time Vinnie came to the studio, he started doing a solo and got down on his knees. I thought it was one of the goofiest things I'd ever seen. You just didn't do that at an audition.
You know, look, I was a newcomer, so I appreciate that advice.
We thought he was wrong for the band. I kept telling him, look, you can't be the guitar player. You're too thin, you're too small, and you just don't look like you're part of the band. And he kept saying, no, I belong.
I love Gene. We've in the early days, he treated me so supportive, you know?
No. He was odd-looking and shifty.
Well, Vinnie, they're doing E.T. Part 2, and Vinnie's up for the role.
Boy.
Vinnie Goes Rock. No, I mean, it's E.T. Goes Rock.
That's funny.
It's only rock and roll.
Vinnie was really cool. I mean, Vinnie's a real talent. I mean, I have to give him that credit. You know, he's a great guitar player. He's a great singer.
I'm doing great, and the honor is mine. I'm thrilled to be here.
But honestly, no. I mean, he wasn't about to, like, on this first album with Kiss all of a sudden do a lead vocal, you know? Not if I had anything to do with it, but that's another story.
We were between a rock and a hard place, and Vinnie ended up playing on a lot of tracks for the album.
I actually have to listen to Creatures' album again. It's barely been a long time since I heard my playing. Creatures' album, I think I had played a few pieces on there that weren't bad.
Yeah. His performance should have been a shot across the bow for us. It was torture working with him. He didn't like to be told what or how to play.
Where Kiss was at in the days was, here comes this kid, you know?
No.
I wanted to, you know, I wanted to rule the world, and, you know, they have already ruled the world. I came and wanted to be as much help to this band as I could and bring whatever I could. And I did feel with all my heart that this was everything I've ever wanted. You know, there was nothing I wanted more than that in my life. Nothing.
And from the outset, he did things like inviting us out to dinner, and then when the check came, announcing that he had forgotten his wallet.
There was, you know...
I didn't mind paying, but why would you go and invite me to dinner and then make believe you don't have your wallet?
These are my friends, you know? No. These are guys I love. I love them to this day, you know? I've got tremendous, I've got memories that are wonderful, you know? Most of them are. Everything was great.
For us, Creatures was done with the shock and realization of how completely lost we had gotten. The album was a declaration of our intent to get back on track. Eric was relieved, as this was what he had expected all along. He was definitely happier all through the recording process.
You know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, that's like one of the best albums that Kiss has ever done.
One afternoon, a carload of little kids and what I presumed was one of their dads showed up at the studio, and Gene ushered them into the room where we recorded. They gathered around a microphone. They were there to sing background vocals on a song. What the hell? Gene, it turned out, had made a deal with a Hollywood producer. If the guy could send his kids and their friends to sing background vocals on a Kiss song, Gene would get some brownie points for some acting work out of the guy. What? Are you fucking kidding me? I was furious. And not just because Gene hadn't asked in advance for my okay. He was whoring us out and compromising our album for his own benefit. It offended me that he tried to get acting roles in that way. I had been studying acting long before he had the idea to get into movies. In fact, he had told me he had no interest in acting. If you walk behind an elephant, you end up cleaning up the shit. I spent my free time in LA with Donna Dixon. Part of the reason I invested so much in Donna was because she still managed to keep me at arm's length, no matter the closeness we had developed. I was awed by her beauty and placed her on a pedestal, which quickly must become one of the most boring and unsexy places for a woman to be. Once we finished recording Creatures, I spent much of the rest of the year going back and forth between LA and New York to see Donna. She auditioned for a movie called Dr. Detroit. She told me after the audition that she thought that Dan Aykroyd, the star of the film, was a genius. I thought that assessment was a stretch.
No. But the show must go on.
Kiss shot a video for I Love It Loud with Ace. Then he went with us to Europe for some lip-synced promotional appearances at the time of the release of Creatures of the Night. He was very fragile, and in Europe he said to me, "I'm on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I can't do this anymore." When we flew back to the States, that was it. Ace was gone for good.
Has it ever occurred to the band to call Kiss quits?
We were going to call it the Grateful Dead, but we weren't going to call it quits.
Do the members of Kiss ever feel like, Jesus, this is the last night I'm going to put this makeup on. I don't need this anymore. I got it made. I have my solo things.
Yeah. Those guys wanted to tour constantly. They were workaholics. You know, I was the kind of guy that wanted to tour for a while, make some money, enjoy my sports car, go fishing, hang out with my friends, shoot guns, you know, go bowling. You know, and they didn't have any friends.
Det här är Gene Simmons.
Yeah, Gene Simmons.
Från Kiss.
From Kiss, that's right.
Varsågod och sitt.
There was some incongruity there, and that's what caused the friction, and I realized, you know, eventually I wanted to start my own band and be my own boss.
Ace, Peter, Bill Aucoin, all gone. People were dropping like flies all around us. Where did everybody go? Huh? Gene seemed fixated on Hollywood and spent as little time as possible on things related to the band.
Boy, how many cities are we going out on?
100 cities, Gene.
Really?
Gene didn't know. Gene, we're going out, we're doing 100 cities this tour.
In his inimitable, dismissive, self-serving style, Gene liked to say, "Well, Paul only wants to be a rock star. I want so much more in life." I didn't understand why everybody was jumping ship. We were still Kiss, and I still looked at the band as my life raft.
I have so much Kiss material because I recorded everything from our songwriting sessions. It's endless what I have. I actually remember recording every Kiss show from Creatures. I recorded our rehearsals, our jam sessions. We were great.
We had a tour scheduled to start on December 27th, 1982, and we didn't have a permanent replacement for Ace yet. I'd felt from the get-go that Vinny wouldn't work in the band. And in the interim, some nasty rumors had spread about him stealing equipment from the rehearsal studio, but nobody else was on the horizon.
Wow, I don't know. The conversation's kind of going in different ways here.
No. With Creatures done, we either had to lose the window of our tour or go off on tour with this guy. We eventually caved in and accepted Vinny.
When the decision was made to bring him in, I said to Gene, I just want to go on record saying this is a bad move.
Lead guitarist Ace Frehley no longer tours with Kiss, and drummer Peter Criss has left the group.
Everybody loved Ace.
If we had hoped that taking him into the fold might lessen the headaches of dealing with him, those hopes were not fulfilled.
With the Creatures tour coming on the heels of several financial disasters, we'd had to tighten our belt so Vinny didn't get a Porsche.
Mean Mr. Mustard, yeah.
He wanted to be called Mick Fury.
What?
I didn't have the heart to tell him that he wasn't qualified to do this kind of stuff, and that he should just show up on time and make lots of money.
I get that part.
Why did everybody come up with cartoon names? I just looked at him like, are you serious?
No.
We settled on Vinnie Vincent.
Paul designed Vinny's Ankh makeup and his Wiz character.
After playing around with ideas for his makeup, I designed the Egyptian Ankh image.
And it's an Ankh symbol. It's called, it's
Ankh, it's Egyptian for light.
Wow. Something happened when we began to write songs together. You know, for whatever unhappiness there was, I think it was meant to be.
As far as his knowledge of and understanding of the guitar, Vinny was terrific. I'd written with him and heard him play and sing and knew his talent.
He wrote some really interesting things at rehearsals before Paul would get there. What? And Christ, we were fucking hot, the three of us. All of a sudden, there was nothing that was holding anybody back, and, you know, it was like, you know, unbridled. It was just a three-piece, Gene, me, and Eric.
Vinny worsened.
It was pretty obvious from very early on that he really was not into being a member of a band. He wanted his own band. And and one of the reasons why he didn't stay with us is because he tried to turn things around and like kind of make it his band, you know, and that's not the way it is.
It was a great time for the band, and it could have gone on. There was only one thing stopping it, and I think you know the answer to that.
He didn't sign his contract, ever. Finally, we told him he had to sign.
I won't go too far into too much because whatever I say becomes just controversial and becomes a mess.
It was an offer of employment. He could be in the band or not.
What it was contractual. All of the problems we had were contractual.
There's so much politics and so much stuff going on, you know.
But we didn't want to discuss it. It was non-negotiable.
Publishing is like owning your house, owning your car. If you don't own it, you're leasing it, you're renting it. So the people who say that that's not important are usually the ones that want your property. All I had asked for was to be treated fair, you know.
The problem was that he had no sense of what to play or when, and he had no ability to self-edit.
It can go both ways.
His playing was like puking. It just came splattering out. He wanted to show how fast he could play, how many notes he could play. He didn't think things out. This became more problematic when the tour started.
It was a time of being a guitarist. That's what I wanted to be, you know. That was my time. But working in context of what the band was, I'd say that I give them credit for knowing more than me.
On stage, Vinny was hell-bent on using every solo as an opportunity to showcase himself.
During the Kiss years, you know, it was, maybe it was self-imposed, you know, limitations, but I was nowhere near what I wanted to be, and it was frustrating, you know, and I thought, I'm never going to be the guitarist I want to be. I'm never going to reach it, you know.
He was intensely jealous of guys like Randy Rhoads and Jakey Lee because he thought he was as good as them.
You know, it was, you know, went home frustrated.
He wanted his just due, and his solo spot in the middle of the show became ungodly long. We used to call it the high point of the show because everybody in the audience left to go get high.
But I love them. I love them both. I don't know why it's this continuous need to say these things, but I won't. I won't go there because I think everything that had happened was very special, and I think fans know it. I think it was a great chapter in the band's career. I don't know. I can't speak for them.
The Creatures tour did horrendously in most markets. Before we went on stage, we'd hear, "You wanted the best, you got the best, the hottest band in the land." And we'd walk out to find nobody was there.
What's a great point we're real proud of is that this tour is our 10th anniversary.
We had packed the same venues a few years before, but now, if I threw my guitar pick too far, it sailed over people's heads and landed on the floor. We left blood, as they say in the business. It was a death march for us and for the concert promoters. We got back on track with Creatures, but fans were not that forgiving. It was going to take years to win back our fans and make new fans. We had betrayed them.
I figured one of the things that people want, they want to hear Vinny play.
Oh, God. Not always can you have a band and have a certain... I hate this word magic, but it is a magic. It's something that You can't put it into words. The Beatles had it.
I loved the position I had. I loved the stature of the band and how I was perceived. And losing that was horrible. I dealt with the depression by sleeping. It was my way of checking out. I was so depressed that I couldn't keep my eyes open anywhere. It got so bad that I fell asleep in the dressing room before shows. I still looked to Donna for a sense of calm and security. I could spend hours talking to her on the phone every day. She was gearing up for the release of Dr. Detroit. She told me once again that she needed space. I don't know whether the tour situation or the overall band crisis affected Gene. No. Eric, for his part, didn't understand the financial side. He wasn't aware of how the disastrous turnouts related to our budgeting. He just loved being in the band and loved playing the material from the new album. One morning, just before we left for South America for the last leg of the tour, I glanced at a copy of the newspaper and a small article caught my eye. The actress Donna Dixon has married her Dr. Detroit co-star Dan Aykroyd. Newly discovered paperwork shows. The marriage license came to light in Martha's Vineyard.
Love is a gun, love is a blade.
What? Martha's Vineyard?
Bitch is insane, she deals in pain.
It turned out they had already been married for 3 months. Suddenly, I felt like I was underwater. I could barely move. I called her. You were married when we were talking? She said something about how she hoped I would find what she had found. No explanation, no apology. I hung up. From then on, it was a struggle to do anything.
KISS was now made up of Eric Carr, Vinnie Vincent, Paul, and me. We liked Creatures of the Night and hoped for the best. But the album did poorly.
The reason that it didn't do as well is because when The Elder came out, fans that were already a little, disillusioned and afraid about what was happening with the band, with Peter leaving, and then, bought The Elder, and maybe they weren't prepared for that because it was a real departure. They probably, I'm sure a lot of fans stayed away from Creatures just being like afraid to find out what the band was into. They thought that, it was going to be more of the same or even softer.
I toured in Australia and Europe and New Zealand with them when I first joined. I haven't played in the States yet, and I'm still, there's still that challenge, there's that one final hurdle for me personally. When I already played the hometown, the first show that I did with KISS was the Palladium.
It took such a long break that some people thought that we had somehow vanished into thin air.
We stayed in New York for a while and did sort of normal things like stay out all night and go to clubs and have lots of girls. And
after I struggled out of bed one day to get to an interview, the reporter asked me, "How does it feel to be on the Titanic?" Writers looked at us as a commodity and forgot that we were people. Another interviewer asked, "How does it feel to be dying?" What? They were so hateful.
Apparently the audiences are not, the record-buying public is not so enthusiastic about the images they used to be. Think your time has passed? That's a good question. You're in your 30s now. Do you feel slightly ridiculous appearing in public like this anymore? Not at all. Let's hear your message, quote-unquote. What are you trying to tell my 14-year-old daughter?
Well, if she was a little bit older, I'd tell her to come to my hotel room.
Okay.
Don't let my daughter go now. I will find you. I will kill you.
Those pricks on the phone were not going to decide whether I got the thumbs up or thumbs down in the arena. KISS was everything to me. And right then I swore I would do whatever it took to keep my life raft afloat. KISS will never die.
There were picket lines in Nashville, a record-breaking protest in Little Rock, a standing room only city council meeting in Corpus Christi, and headlines all over the country: Minneapolis, Dubuque, Chattanooga, and Bismarck, North Dakota. The protesters are mainly religious groups who have been trying unsuccessfully to get KISS concerts stopped because they say KISS promotes the worship of Satan.
Their music and their lyrics is espousing Satan worship and drugs among our kids, and you're looking at a preacher in Pine Bluff, Arkansas that's against it, and we're going to stand against it.
I don't think we'd like those people to like us. They're strange.
What they do, according to many Christian leaders, is use their evil-looking makeup along with lyrics such as "I was raised by the demons" and "I'm king of the nighttime world" to influence their fans to idolize the underworld.
At that time, misinformation about the band began to spread in the southern Bible Belt states, including a rumor that the name KISS stood for Knights in Satan Service.
The four of us were devil worshippers.
It was just about, the fact that, I was brought up in a religious home. I was raised a Christian, and, I'm not a big devil worshipping fan. I hope I cleared some stuff up.
If they saw a guy on TV with his face painted white and his hair pulled up on top of his head and thought he was real...
Actually, what I am is evil incarnate. And some of those cheeks and necks look really good.
And that he was stating facts when he said he was evil incarnate, they were the ones who were crazy, not us.
Incidentally, he's up for adoption.
Did these people really think we looked like this all day?
Yeah.
Did they also think the guy who played Batman was really Batman?
Yeah. It'd be funny if under this he was just a nice Jewish boy.
Kiss was all positivity. Hell, all anyone had to do was listen to the lyrics from our mission statement off Destroyer shouted out loud. Well, the night's begun and you want some fun. Do you think you're gonna find it? You got to treat yourself like number one. Do you need to be reminded?
Kiss knows they can use the controversy. Their concerts have only been selling at 50 to 75% capacity, and their latest album, Creatures of the Night, is the poorest selling album of their career.
We booked an American tour, and it was the least successful tour we'd ever done. The music scene was changing. Acts like Michael Jackson were in ascent, and no one showed up to hear us play.
The Providence Civic Center was built to bring entertainment and business to the area, but it's had problems recently.
Kiss was supposed to play Providence this weekend, but not enough tickets sold and the concert was canceled.
In June 1983, we flew to Brazil and played to 180,000 screaming fans in Maracanã Stadium in Rio. It was the biggest audience we had ever performed in front of. We could still play the biggest stadiums in South America, but we were in a very shaky position in North America.
Yes, we're going on tour. Yes, we were going to blow up buildings. And yes, we watch MTV. I want my MTV. I want my MTV.
I just want a TV set.
The biggest change at that time was the rise of MTV. Music was being overtaken by a certain visual style. We'd been a visual band since the beginning, but oddly, our idea of visual panache didn't necessarily translate in the world of early 80s rock and roll.
Everything is changing. There's heavy metal for everyone still, and I think the wave has gotten more commercial. And I enjoy it. I really do. I enjoy everything. I love all kinds of music.
We knew we had to build Kiss from the ground up all over again.
So for the first time in our career, we did exactly what we saw was happening with other bands. Instead of being leaders, we decided basically to follow. At around that time, we decided to drop the one visual element that had been associated with Kiss most strongly, and from the very beginning, our makeup.
This is a really big moment. After 10 years together, exclusively here on MTV this evening, we are going to see Kiss without their makeup for the very first time.
Back in the States, I once again urged Gene to agree to do the most radical thing we could do, take off our makeup. Some people saw this as a bold move. I saw it as our only move.
It was great when we were doing it. It was a lot of fun. Nothing that mere humans can do is going to compete with that, you know, because it's a larger-than-life thing, and I was really proud to be a part of that. But at the same time, I could understand, and I was feeling myself, that it was just time for the band to change. I didn't want the makeup to stand in the way of the band.
Kiss was a very happy time. We wrote great songs. We had a great band. I met great fans. If it wasn't for Kiss, I would not be here. I wouldn't be Vinnie Vincent. I'm there for Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, my friend Eric Carr, who's no longer with us, Ace Frehley, Peter Criss. I'm there anytime, any place, anywhere.
People were tired of what Kiss had become. With the new characters, we were one step removed from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. What? I mean, what the hell was Vinnie's Ankh about?
It's an Ankh, it's Egyptian for life. Whatever.
Rather than keeping the original personas and images alive, we had become a ridiculous menagerie. What was next? Turtle Boy?